Chapter 306. In the best part of the west of Luoyua City, there was a huge manor that occupied 70% of the area. The owner of this manor was undoubtedly the overlord of Luoyua City, the He family, which had many empresses and concubines. At this moment, in the originally peaceful manor, a large number of family guards and masters fell down in disorder. Only a small group of He family seniors were caught and driven to the front hall square. Not long after, a group of women from the He family who were hiding in the backyard also rushed over in a panic. Among them, the great imperial concubine who had married the great prince, He Yulan, who was dressed in a red dress, was among them. He Yulan was pushed forward by Fong Mu indifferently. She slipped and fell in front of He Luan, the master of He family. He Luan was shocked and quickly stepped forward to support his daughter. He was so angry that he almost went crazy. He pointed at Fong Mu and shouted, "How dare you? How dare you? In broad daylight, you dare to break into the Prime Minister's mansion and hurt the first princess. No matter who is behind you, don't think about leaving Tianji country alive." Chu Qingning clicked his tongue and played with the long knife. He shook his head and walked to the two of them, saying, "Old guy, you really dare to say that? Aren't you afraid that we will kill you all and leave directly?" He Luan's face was slightly pale, but his tone did not soften. He sneered, "No, you dare not. Luoyua City is not far from Tantai City. If you really dare to do that, you will also die with me." Chu Qingning sneered, "Master He, I advise you not to say too much. Be careful of retribution. Let's not talk about how useful your unfavored daughter of the Empress can be. Even your father is getting old now. I think the position of the Prime Minister should be changed to someone else." "Nonsense," He Lun scolded without thinking. "The national affairs of Tianji country are not decided by you, a young boy. Forget it. It's really boring to talk to an old fool. I'd better let the person who makes the decision today come and talk to you." Chu Qingming left with a smile. His words made He Luan's heart sink. If this person was not the person who made the decision, although he was full of confidence just now, he was actually very confused and flustered. Just half a quarter of an hour ago, this group of young people came to fight without saying a word. The martial arts masters in the mansion who could fight against 10 people were as weak as paper in front of more than a dozen of them. They couldn't even resist one move at all, so they were all caught before they had time to escape into the tunnel. How terrifying would a force that could gather so many young experts together be? Of course, he didn't know that Su Li trained these people to deal with the terrible forces with at least the longevity realm stationed in the future. To deal with a medium family in the secular world, it was like killing a chicken with a butcher's knife. His face was so gloomy that even Luo Chen stood out from the crowd beside him. "Master, all these families not long immediately Fong Yuan broke through. Even Fong Yuan himself, as if he was surprised by the breakthrough. Her expression immediately but everything changed. Go and ask Zhang Laoshan. She became the first practitioner. All the information in the middle of her words. Her eyes fell on seeing Ling Li give up the previous idea. Somewhat similar. Ling Mo breathed a sigh. She suddenly thought of something. After Ling, he learned that Su Li instantly became extremely. She was looking at the soft chair under the bookshelf. When he hurried here, he knew that Su Luan was slightly shocked. Why did Su Li suddenly disappear? Was it because she knew what he did underground? The bastard who killed Ling. Well, he learned there appeared on Luo Chen's, but when he found that the restaurant he said coldly building was closed for half an hour, he wanted to stop him. Finally realized very disappointed by him. You still have the people in the building also disappeared. It was a mess. Yulan finally disappeared. Jing instantly take action. Later, when he thought of all the people he was in this building around, if he hadn't died, he sat on the ground outside and hired more people to inquire about if it hadn't been for you and waited for Su at that time, wouldn't have had or another result. In front of the building, Jing stood in silence. Really even found some clues. And the sarcasm turned out that it was not the Haguan sect that destroyed only the sickness of his family dared. But the lean as for the spirit out, not only that, there was an Although I was
even the
young,
two major
I was not
forces
a
of this
hot-blooded
kinky
country,
so she
and the
didn't.
ghost
It has
vow
nothing to do
distract
with
me.
me.
One
Whether
at this brother is a
Chu Shao
also
cautiously
fell
walked
into
into
her
her
hands
unfortunately
and
and
whispered
whispered.
He should have the idea.
The masters
Great
controlled by
sister.
Mr. Li.
After the disappearance of the
far
first
more
Luo
powerful
Chen
than
looked
any
any
other
Ma
forces
called my
made.
scapula was
Even the
huge.
Shaoshan
I could
Palace. It
not
seems that there's a
exert
tendency
power
to break
Why
out.
did he want so many forces?
Jing Exen,
You sent a
narrowed
senior
her
to
eyes
inform
slightly
to cut the
even
lead.
arrested
Her
several
expression
high-level
in
people
reaction
in the
were
unfortunately
very similar.
but his
His
kid's luck
luck
was
was
really
really
good.
good.
Ling
I didn't
almost
expect
went
that he was
crazy
lucky
and
enough
didn't get
to
the
engage
news
with
of
his
Su Li
wife
for
so
a long
deep.
time.
Over the years,
So he made
dare not
so
forget
crazy.
the
He
great
couldn't help it.
kindness
He would
of
attack the
Master
Han
Jing
country
Today,
controlled
Jing
by
Exen
finally have a
Dong
chance to
family
repay.
in
Chu Shao
advance.
stood
He learned
aside
finally
only in
could
this way
help
could
his
showing
daughter
the clues
clues
after a
panic on
while.
his face.
Finds
Jing
heard the
Exen
last word.
in this
Slightly
regard,
raised her
Luo,
head.
although
Whispered,
Ling Qing
"Don't
was
act
and others
critical
tried
time.
their best.
You have
The less
already
they
committed
become
useless.
useless.
The
If
less
you
the
regret
Yin
now,
Master
and let us go.
immediately
It's not
enter
just
the
send someone to
stage of
warn
war
him. If you do it,
preparation.
but your
But
Luo
before the
plan
plan
was
was
tried.
finished,
In case
Chu
Ling's
Shao
sister will
uses
also
him
be
on
implicated
matters of
by
big
you.
trouble.
For the
You have
safety
to
of
think
clearly
clearly.
this.
The plan
Jing
had
Exen's
Exen's
influence
words
was
became
somewhat
reasonable.
but Ling Li would
At
not
the same
trust
time,
Chen was
let you
not
Wu Hai
the
go. As long as he
indecisive
found some
Shaoshan
news about
Palace,
Chu Shao,
and
he didn't
warn
say
him.
a word.
I believe that as long
as
as he
he
was
was
not
unstupid,
stupid,
it would be
he will
best
not
if he could find
fight
Su
against
Li.
the lean
But if not,
two swords
which
instantly
instantly
pierced
pierced
Lun's
Lun's
shoulder
crazily.
scapula.
The Dong
Suddenly,
Feng
an
family
extreme
came
tension
outside the
immediately
door.
made
It's
him.
okay
It was
to abandon
extremely
it.
urgent.
Guy, I'll
I
do it
haven't
right
been
away.
there any
News
news
about
in the Ling
and he
mansion.
started
It was
screaming.
Chiu
Hierarch
Meng
the
who
pain that I
came
was
in.
tortured by
At this
you and
moment,
if you continue to
her
make
face
trouble,
was pale.
it will not do
And there
any
was
enjoy
still
it.
tears
The
in her
screams
eyes. Miss Su is
echoed
now
over
in
the
a
critical
man.
She had worried a
Mixed
lot
views
about
screams
Su
in
Li
the
fear
past 2
women.
days.
If
which
you
lasted
insist he
this
tighten his
time.
lips,
I'm afraid that
Chu
thought
Qing
of
Su
Su
will
shall
fall into
tree,
eternal
but he didn't
damnation.
say
Open a watermelon.
anything.
That's all I have to
Watching
say.
while eating.
It would only
Hierarchally,
make people
he didn't
more
forget to
forget
touch
himself.
Fong Mu
If he
next
said
after
something
Chu
that had
Shao
not been
said the
confirmed.
last
I say,
sentence.
the words that Luo
disappeared,
Yichen said today
leaving only
are
more
more
than
than
what he
was
said
so
past year.
anxious that she
It seems that he was
frowned
really
and said,
tortured by
how
this
could such a
old guy.
big living
Fong
person
Mu
disappear?
was dozing off.
Is she
and
tired
was
of
woken
living
up by
here
Chu
and
Qing.
sneaked
He
away
said
somewhere?
helplessly,
Impossible.
I heard from Butler Wu
Ling
that
Li
Brother
pinched the
Luo's
wheelchair
mother
with his
missed him
fingers
so much
and said
that she
firmly,
died during these years.
Li has
that
been
he
well
left.
behaved these
His father
years
was also
and has
seriously
never been
ill
out of the
and
Ling mansion.
seemed to be dying.
If she wants to leave,
Only Luo,
how can there be no
Yinging
sign?
was left in
She
such
must be
a big
delayed by
family.
something.
If we came a
Xiao
little
Mei
later,
was shocked by Ling
Luo
Li's
Yinging
momentum.
would marry
She
that
secretly
ruffian.
thought that her
I guess that when
youngest
Brother
son
Luo
was
came
just a
back,
loafer.
he would kill
How
the
could his
whole
momentum
family
be stronger
saying
than that of
any
his
second brother?
You're considered
But she
lucky
didn't think
to be
much
here today.
and quickly
Brother
comforted
Luo is a little
Yes,
too
yes, it must be
talkative,
so.
and it's only
I will
human
urge
nature.
Qinglong to send
Tut,
more people.
I didn't know that your
and
speed
all the
of
guards in
collecting
our
information
is getting
Ling Li
faster
responded
and faster.
and closed his eyes.
Chu Qingning
painfully.
stared at Fong
He even
Mu
sent
in
most of the
surprise,
people in the Yinma
and then
cult.
stopped talking,
What was the use
quietly
of the few
waiting
people
for
in the
Luo
Ling
Yingchen to
mansion?
finish.
Now he could
Half a
only
day
hope
later,
that what Chu
it was
Shao
evening.
said was true.
The setting sun
the
was
time
like
came,
blood,
Su
which
Li
made
would
the
come
blood
back by
stains in a
herself.
manner more magnificent.
Strength. I need strength.
Luo Yichen put
If my
the long
strength
sword
is
into the
equal
sheath,
to Mr.
and his
Li's,
blood,
I can go
and she
anywhere in
lingered.
the world.
He
I
stared
don't
at
need
the
to worry
manor
that I
square
can't
that had
find
been
Su
completely
Li.
quiet.
Ling Li
and a sense of relief
crazily
and
in his heart.
disappointment,
But
rose
more
in
than
his
that,
heart.
he
The
felt
goal
a
that had
sense of
supported him to
powerlessness.
practice hard for a
Waiting
long
and
time
suffering
suddenly
were equally
disappeared.
long.
And
This
he would
year was
inevitably
extremely
be
torturous
confused.
for Ling Li.
At this moment,
Dongfang Rue,
Luo Yinging
Qi
gently
Xianxin,
wrapped her
and the
arms
people
around
of the
his
Lin Li
shoulders.
The
sending
tactical
him a
matrix
silent
was
comfort.
not finished.
Eldest brother,
in the middle of
you have done
operation,
enough.
the
Let's
blood
go
of the
home.
life ring
Hearing
in the
this,
tactical
Luo
matrix
Yichen
gathered
smiled
to the center
warmly and
and
said,
completely wrapped
"Okay,
Su Li.
let's go home,"
forming
Chu
a
Qingling,
blood cocoon.
who was still
No
cleaning
one
up
could
the
see the
mess,
situation
stood up
inside,
and watched Luo
including the
Yichen
two old
leave from the
guys.
gate of Yi
But for the
family.
common people
Looking at
and
the corpses in the
cultivators,
square,
this
he
year
couldn't
was an
help but
extremely
pout.
lucky year.
Killing
because
is
no
addictive.
matter which realm
It seems
of
that after
forces
going
we're
back
in,
this time,
they were all
both we and
incomparably
Luo
well
Yichen
behaved.
should have a good rest.
It was as if there was a force
Fong
that
Mu
was
nodded nodded
deterring
gently,
them,
preventing
and at the
them
same
from
time,
acting recklessly.
there were different thoughts.
This phenomenon became
their desire
more
to
and
kill
more obvious
skyrocketed.
after the spiritual
It seemed to
realm
have a
sent
greater
people
relationship
to eliminate
with Suli
a troublesome force.
since the morning of the
In
rainstorm.
a blink of an eye,
Sister
10
Suli
months
came
passed,
back seriously injured, and her style of doing things has become more and more unscrupulous.
Chapter
Fong
3:14.
Mu sighed deeply.
Rumble, and then
the
his
blood-colored
eyes became
tactical
firm.
matrix
After
that
the
covered
cause and
hundreds
effect
of
were
feet
settled.
shook.
As long as
time
Sister
went by,
Suli said,
the magnitude
they would
of the
execute
vibration
it without
became
hesitation.
greater and greater.
They didn't need to think
Cracks
about
appeared
other things
and extended to
This
the
was
feet
also the
of Chi
only
Xian
meaning
Ching
of living
and the old
in the
beggar.
second half of
What's
their
the matter?
lives.
The
He
old
believed
beggar's
that
Numa
not
was
only
much
himself,
worse than 10
but
months
also
ago.
his eldest
He
brother,
looked at
Brother
Chi
Chu,
Xian
and Brother
who was
Luo
also
had the
weak
same
with
idea
surprise
as
and
him.
doubt.
At this
But he saw
moment,
that the latter
Su
frowned.
Li, who
It
was
was the
missed
first
by
time
Fong
to
Mu,
drive
was
the
in the East
tactical
Palace
matrix
of the
of
Genji
reincarnation
country.
in
However,
such a way.
she appeared
How did
in
he
the
know the
identities
changes?
of Mr. Li.
Boom.
As the night
Boom.
fell,
The
the
movement
palace
of the
tactical
lanterns on the
matrix was
roadside
getting
were lit.
greater and
The East
greater.
Palace was
A large
brightly
number
lit
of tactical
as if it were
matrix
daytime.
patterns were broken.
Suli
during the
walked to the
vibration,
window
and
and
looked at
Numa
the bright
also had the
moon hanging
tendency
high
to
in the
spread
sky.
out.
She narrowed her eyes slightly, and the old beggar had no choice
followed her
but
step
to
by
suppress
step
it.
with a helpless
But no
look.
matter how the
He
tactical
didn't resist
matrix
as he
shook,
did when he
the
met
blood cocoon
Mr. Lee
in
an
the
hour
center
ago.
of the tactical
The
matrix
reason that
was
made
still
him lose his
motionless.
resistance
Failed.
was
The
very
old
simple.
beggar's face
One
was
sentence was
slightly
enough.
pale.
The
The
royal
matrix
family of
patterns were
Nanjiang
broken,
country
which
is
meant that
not
the
willing to
tactical
listen to my
matrix
orders.
stopped running.
I killed them
and
all
the blood
and
cocoon
replaced another
was
family.
still motionless.
If you don't want to be a
There was
sinner
only
of the
one
Tantai
result.
family,
That was
be
the person in the tactical matrix.
After a
was
long
dead.
silence,
Qi
in the palace,
Xianqing,
you said
Suli retracted her
60
gaze
or 70%.
and looked at Tantai
What about
Yu,
me,
who
This
pretended to
tactical
be
matrix has
respectful
cost us
and accompanied her
10,000
with her
years of
keen
life.
psychic sense.
How can we just let it go?
She could feel the
Qi Xianqing's
unwillingness
face was
around
gloomy,
Tantai Yu,
and he didn't speak,
which was as striking
His gray
as a
eyes stared at
lighthouse
the
in
blood
dark.
cocoon.
She didn't
smiled
believe that
slightly
Su Li,
and said,
who had always been
"Do you remember what I
determined,
just said?"
could not bear the pain
Tantai
and
Yu
died.
immediately nodded
Well, it's
and
fate.
said in a deep
The
voice,
old beggar
"I
saw
will
that
try
the
to
blood
improve the
cocoon in the
strength
middle
of
of
the
the
palace
tactical
guards of
matrix
sacrifice
also
in a short
began to
period of
peel
time.
off.
Select
and be
100,000 elite
He couldn't
soldiers
help
for
but
intensive
sigh
training
and withdrew
and
his
wait for your
means.
orders at any time.
This place is
I
about
remember
to
all
collapse,
these, and the
Very
movement
good.
will not be
Suli
small.
turned around
In order to
and
prevent
left
the
the
mirror
sentence.
spirit from
Then she
noticing,
left from the main
we should
hall of the
leave
palace.
early.
If those
Qi
people are used
Xianqing
up,
seemed not to
I
hear
will
it
give them to
and
you.
still stared
If
at
there
the
are any
blood
left,
cocoon. I will
the
give them to
free
you.
and easy
It won't be
old
long
beggar
before you become the
always
real
laughed
monarch
at the world
of
of
Tianji
mortals
country.
and didn't
I don't
care
have
about
much time.
anything.
Tantai
Finally
Yu
became
followed
angry.
Su Li
Suddenly,
to the door
tear.
of the main hall.
There was a tearing
Seeing
sound
Su
like claws.
Li's figure in
Although the
sight,
sound was very
he finally
small,
breathed
it could
a
not
long
escape
sigh
the
of
ears
relief.
of the two old guys.
Although Mr. Li did
Qi
not show
Xianqing's
any momentum
eyes
from beginning
instantly
to
brightened.
end.
His
Then he
back
saw
was
a pale
already
hand
wet.
stretched out from
Brother,
the crack
are you
of the blood
okay?
cocoon.
Tantai
And then
Mingwe came from the
tore
corner of
hard.
the palace
Ha, ha, ha,
and
ha.
said with a worried
Success.
face,
You
the
shouldn't
smile on
resist
Qi
that man.
Xianqing's face
It's not
couldn't
bad for
stop
you to
expanding.
agree. And the
I know.
old beggar was
I will
also
bear it.
surprised. Tantai
He
Yu
stared
took
at
a
the
deep
figure
breath
slowly
and said with
struggling
bright
out of
eyes,
the blood cocoon.
I will listen to him
for fear
He can
of
destroy
missing any
Nanjiang
details.
country.
So
But
after
after
destroy
Su
my
Li
Tianji
completely
country
got out of the blood
there is no
cocoon,
need for such
Qi
a person to
Xianqing
deceive
saw
me.
a mass of
Why should I
blood in her
sacrifice
arms?
my
And
future
the
for
smile
a
on
dying
his
person?
face immediately froze. What was
Chapter
that? When
3,
Su Li saw the
07.
two
The
dispirited
next morning,
old people,
Tantai Yu was
there was
pulled
a
up from the
slight
bed by
fluctuation in her
Tantai
eyes,
Mingwe
but
when
it
he was
soon
in a
calmed
daze.
down.
Second
10
sister,
months
what
was
happened?
enough for her
Why are
to
you in such a
understand
hurry?
many things.
There
There were two dark circles under Tantai
This
Yu's
included
eyes.
why the two
He thought too much
ancient
these
existences
days.
in front of
He
him
didn't fall
seemed to have
asleep
suffered
until the latter
heavy
half of the
injuries,
night yesterday,
and their auras
he just
were
slept for
weak.
less than 4
The
hours.
tens of thousands of
Tantai
life
Mingwe
rings
didn't care
alone
so much.
only occupied
She held the crown
70%
prince's
of
clothes
the resources
and urged,
of the
"Get
heavenly
up."
isolation
This morning,
formation.
Father
And the other
suddenly
30%
announced that the Empress
came
was
from these two
banished to the
people.
cold palace.
From their expressions,
What?
it could be seen
Tantai
how
Yu
much
woke
they
up
had
and
paid
couldn't
to
believe
operate
it.
the formation.
Jinwei was banished to the
Unfortunately,
cold palace.
I failed.
Tantai
Suli suddenly
Mingwe
opened her mouth.
nodded cautiously.
Her voice was
I have
hard
been
and
to the
harsh,
Chinquin Palace,
as if her throat had
it has been blocked
seriously
by
hurt.
Father.
It was
No one
not
could
as
see the
pleasant
situation
as usual.
inside.
Failed.
Didn't Prime Minister
The
Yu
old
protest?
beggar's expression
He Jinwei
changed
is his
slightly.
eldest granddaughter.
He moved closer
Tantai Yu
and
was
said,
confused.
"You can come out
In the
alive."
past, his father
How could you-
tolerated he
before he
Jinwei
finished his words,
because he was afraid
he finally
of the He
saw
family.
what Su Li was
He even
holding
asked
in
his
her
mother
arms.
to give up
To
the
be
position
exact,
of the
it was
Empress
a bloody
to He
swaddle.
Jinwei. In the
Why did he
swaddling
suddenly
clothes.
do it?
Wasn't
A
he
baby that
afraid
looked like
that
it was
the He
carved
family
from
would
jade
rebel?
was sleeping
Tantai Mingwe
peacefully.
shook her head.
It was as if this
helplessly.
embrace,
I just got the
which
news,
was filled with the
How
smell
could I find
of
out
blood,
so much?
was the most
But after the
peaceful
news
place
came
in the
out,
world.
the He family
A newborn
hasn't
child?
done anything. The old
A storm
beggar
was coming.
exclaimed.
Tantai
How could you
Yu's
have a
heart
child?
sank.
Although
put on
he
his
was in the
clothes
dark
and
Su
said
Li's
seriously,
activities in these years
"I'm going to see
had
Father
always
now."
been in his eyes.
Okay.
Suli
Tantai
had never
Mingwe
responded
responded
heavily. That was
How
why
could you
she
be
came to
pregnant?
Tantai
Before
Yu.
the old beggar's
Tantai Yu had a
question
good
was
relationship
answered.
with
Qi
Su Li.
Xianqing,
If he went to
whose
ask,
eyes were
Father would
faintly
not
red,
refuse him.
finally
On the
said
way,
angrily,
Tantai
"You
Yu's
gave
heart
all the
was
opportunities
heavy.
to him?"
The He family was
Do
the
you know
most
what it means?
powerful family
Do you
in
know?
Tianji country.
I know.
Except for the
Suli
royal
looked
family.
calm.
She
The head
reached
of the
out
family,
and
he
gently
Jian,
stroked
was
the
over
delicate
70
cheek
years
of the
old.
child in her
He was
arms.
still in charge
A
of the
trace
court.
of tenderness
He was the
flashed
prime
in her
minister
eyes.
of Tianji
I
country.
failed, but you
He
didn't
Tian's
fail.
eldest
Raise him
granddaughter,
well,
He
Jin
still
Wei
get out of here.
became the empress of
Suli,
Qinji country.
a loud
under his
shout
operation.
seemed to exhaust
his youngest granddaughter's
remaining
He
strength.
Yulan.
He was
also
full of
became
sorrow,
the first
but
prince's
looking at
imperial
Su
concubine.
Li's peaceful
If there was no
face,
Su Li,
he didn't know what to say.
He Yulan would be
although
the
they were
next
not of the
empress.
same clan.
At that time,
although
the whole harem
he
would
Su
belong
Li
to the
in
He
this
family.
family.
Everything
All
he
this
did
time,
might be selfish,
imperial father
but Su
did
Li
not
was
make
definitely
eldest
the
brother
one
the
who
crown
benefited
prince.
the most in
Most
the end.
likely because
But
he
now,
saw this point.
In the
He
illusion,
originally thought
even if
that
you give
imperial
birth,
father would use
you'll only
soft
get the soul from
policies
the outside
to
world.
slowly weaken
He's not your
the
son
He
at all.
family's influence.
You're giving this opportunity
he would do
to
the same
others in
just
the
like
future.
that.
He
Don't
did
tell
not
me that I'm
expect
old
that
and muddled,
everything would
and you're
happen
muddled
so
too?
suddenly.
Master,
When he was thinking,
Su Li looked
the imperial
at
study
Qi
was in
Xianqing,
sight.
who
Tantai
almost wanted
quickened
to
his
strangle the
steps
baby
and
in her
walked to the
arms.
door. She
When
called
he
him
was about to
sincerely
speak,
for the first
the old
time,
eunuch
which
guarding
made him
the door
shocked.
said in a
His
sharp
eyes
voice,
filled with
"Your
anger
Highness the
restored
Crown
calmness.
Prince, His Majesty
Good.
has
I
instructed
will give
that
you a
you can
chance.
go in directly.
If you can't convince
This old
me,
servant
I will kill the
reckons
child
that
in
His
your
Majesty
arms."
has been waiting
Sensing
for
the
you.
unquestionable
Tantai was
emotion
slightly
in
surprised
Xinxing's words,
and immediately
Su Li
said,
smiled
"Thank
slightly.
you."
Eunuch
She glanced
Qian,
at the old
"Your
beggar who
Highness
was
is too
listening
polite."
and called softly.
The old
Jing
eunuch
Exen,
smiled
as the
until
voice
wrinkles
fell,
at the corners
a
of his
rainbow
eyes
light
became
came,
wrinkles.
and Jing Exen
This was the
surprised.
future emperor.
So how
Master,
could
you
he
succeed?
dare to be
Su Li
rash?
shook her head.
His
Though
attitude
to eliminate
was much
the
more
movement
respectful
of the
than
tactical
before.
matrix.
Tantai Yu entered the
prepare a
room
quiet room
and glanced around.
Jing Xian
He didn't see a
was
palace
slightly
made
stunned.
except his father, who was writing something at the desk.
Seeing the swaddle
secret
in
talk,
Su Li's
his heart
arms.
tightened slightly.
Although she had many
He
doubts,
walked to the open space
she did
in
as
front
she
of the
was told.
table and
A moment
respectfully
later,
bowed in the quiet room.
This child greets
Master,
imperial
there's
father.
one thing you are
Dan
wrong
Feng
about.
Feng put down
Su
the
Li
pen
gently
in his hand
put down the
and looked up
swaddle
to
in her
see his
arms.
son. The baby
Kneeling down.
immediately
He smiled
stretched out his
indifferently.
hands.
Lucky little guy,
uncomfortably,
get up.
as
Little
if he
guy,
wanted to grasp
Tantai
something.
Yu stood up.
One thing I can
and
be sure
straightened up.
of is that
He was
is my
confused.
son.
His
He
father
is a
used to call
newborn
him you.
soul. Why did he
Not from the
change
outside
such a
world.
strange name today?
Hearing Su
Dan
Li's
Feng Feng
words,
saw his confusion,
Xinxing
but didn't
suddenly
explain.
frowned.
He just
But he
handed
didn't
over the
get angry.
imperial edict.
He
just
pointed at
written
the
in his
baby's
hand.
naguan.
Take it.
After a long
Arrange
time,
the rest.
there was
as
no
soon as
abnormal
possible.
phenomenon.
Tantai Yu
No
was more
life ring.
confused. The old
He took
beggar
the
was
imperial
suddenly
edict
shocked
in a daze
and stood up.
He glanced
Is
at
it
the
the creature
content
in the
of the
illusion?
imperial edict
But it is not right.
inadvertently.
Girl,
His
you are
hands
from the
trembled,
outside world,
and he almost
according
threw
to the law
imperial
of
edict
reincarnation
away.
mirror,
Abdication.
Your
His
offspring
father
in this
actually
world
decided
will
to
inevitably
abdicate the throne
choose
to
a
him
soul 5
from
days
any
later.
life ring in the
Father, why
outside
do you?
world.
Tantai Yu was
with
so
How
anxious
could a new
that his
soul
forehead
appear?
sweated.
Su
He didn't know
Li
what to say
glanced
for a
at
while.
Xinxing,
Dan
who
Feng
was
Feng
thoughtful,
chuckled and shook his head
slowly.
Senior,
Little guy,
did you forget my
don't
identity?
be afraid.
I know why you
beggar
come to
was
me.
stunned.
It's nothing
And then
more
his
than
eyes
the He family.
suddenly
Do you
shook.
think that I
He
compromised
pointed at Su
before
Li
because
and said
I was
unbelievably
afraid that the He
you
family
changed
would
the
rebel?
law of reincarnation
Isn't it?
mirror.
Tantai Yu was
and
completely
succeeded?
confused.
Doesn't that mean
If the middle-aged
Su
man
Li
in
shook
front
her
of him
head and
didn't
said,
give him a very
"Senior,
amiable feeling,
you think too
he
highly
almost
of
thought
me.
that his father was
At best,
replaced by
I'm
someone
just a
else.
lonely ghost with a
Of
little
course not.
authority."
After
How can I change the law
Feng
of
finished
reincarnation
speaking,
mirror?
He seemed to have
This
thought
time,
of something.
I just broke
and his
through the
expression
shackles with the
turned
help
cold.
of the big
That
tactical
kind of
matrix.
ant is not enough.
If there's
to enter
no
my
big
eyes.
tactical matrix,
If it wasn't for Gur,
I can't do it.
why
even
would
if
I be
try my
so
best.
cowardly?
I
But
see.
now I have
The
confirmed
old
some
beggar
things,
was
so
enlightened,
I have less to worry about.
and his eyes focused
The existence
on the sleeping
of
baby.
Jing
His
Xian
pair of
and
turbid
Su Li's
eyes
situation were
gradually
enough
shone.
to let him
Can this
confirm
child
that
really
the
take
real
us
mirror
out of
spirit
reincarnation
of the
mirror?
reincarnation mirror?
Su Li
was
smiled
sleeping.
slightly.
Even if he made a
If
big
the prediction of the
movement,
seniors is
he would
right,
not be suppressed.
it is reasonable.
So he could
Let's not
move
talk about this
freely.
first.
Tantai Yu was stunned.
Xinxing
He opened his
suddenly
mouth,
opened his mouth,
but didn't know what to say.
and his face was
He didn't understand a
faintly
word
irritable.
of what his father said.
He stared at
just
Su
now.
Li's pale face.
Moreover,
and
his
said
father
in a deep voice,
didn't seem to
"Disciple,
be as close
tell
to
me
his
the truth.
children as before.
How much time is
He
left?"
even didn't have the habit
The
of
old
calling
beggar
himself
reacted
Emperor.
quickly when he heard
He
the
faintly
words,
felt that he knew
and his
a
eyes
great
moved from the
secret,
baby to
but his
Su
father
Li,
didn't
who
tell
had been
him in
smiling
detail.
and acting.
He only saw the
as if
tip of the
nothing had
iceberg,
happened.
and
If he
couldn't
didn't
know
say
the whole
it,
picture.
I would have ignored
After
it.
struggling for a
You are
moment,
haunted by the
Tantai
blood
Yu
elixir
couldn't
in
help
your
but
body.
ask. And now you
Father,
give all the
why are you
opportunities
so
of
strange
tactical
today?
matrix of
You make me
reincarnation
feel.
to your son.
Do I feel like an
How can you
outsider?
survive?
Dan
There was
Feng
a silence
laughed,
in response, to
which
him.
made Tantai
the
Yu change
atmosphere
his expression
in the addendum
slightly.
immediately
That's not what I
became
mean.
heavy.
That's what you mean.
patted
Dan
the table
Feng
and
smile
patiently.
remained unchanged.
Finally, in the
In fact,
astonished
you little
eyes
guys
of the
are
old
outsiders.
He asked,
We old guys want to be
repeatedly,
outsiders.
why?
But we
Is it
can't
so
help it.
disgusting to be my
After
apprentice
sighing
that you
slightly,
don't even hesitate
Tantai
to
Feng
die?
looked at Tantai
Or do you not
Yu,
want to
who
live
was
at all?
more and more
Now you have a
confused.
son. He
Which
shook
is
his
just what
head
you
and
want.
smiled.
Boy,
Su Li was still
don't think
silent.
too much.
She
When
stretched
the
out her
time
fingers
comes,
and
you will
gently
know something
teased the
in the
baby who
future.
was less than a
Now,
month
it's
old
too
in
early.
swaddling clothes.
In 2 days, your mother is about to wake up.
The pain
At
and the
that
blood
time,
cocoon,
I will
as
make her the
life
empress
ring
again,
invaded
and
little
then
by
you will
little.
ascend the
was like the
throne.
torture
You
of
can do
thousands
whatever
of
you want in
snakes.
Tinji country.
Even now, thinking
Your
about
mother
it,
and
she
I will
shuddered.
enjoy life.
The boundless
in the imperial
suffering
harem, made her go
unless the
back
country
to the
is
most
in danger,
miserable years
don't
in her
disturb
previous
us.
life.
Tantai
At
was
that time,
overjoyed.
there was a
He didn't find
movement
that
in her
Dan
lower
phone
abdomen.
phone looked
A
a
little
little
bit of
strange
pure
when he said,
vitality condensed.
"Your mother."
Yes,
He responded
it was the son
repeatedly.
she had lost
Mother
in her
is about to
previous
wake up?
life.
That's
You
great.
finally
I'm
forgave
going to prepare
me.
now.
And finally,
As he said,
came back
he was
to
about to
find me.
leave.
The
When he
joy
walked to
of
the door,
regaining what
he
she had
realized
lost
that he seemed
almost
to forget
suppressed
his original
everything in an
purpose
instant
after coming
and
in.
even the increasing
Father,
pain was
he turned his
nothing.
head.
Before
According
he
to the
said in
secret
detail
method
of
Tantai
controlling the
said
reincarnation
without raising
mirror
his
in her
head,
memory,
deal with the affairs
she
of the
forcibly
family
broke
after
the
you ascend
rules
the throne.
and took in
You
a
can
new
find
soul
commanders
from the
Sue
outside
for
world.
specific matters.
Then
He
stayed
and the
in
Black
blood
Scale
cocoon,
Army will be
watching
yours
the
in
life
future.
in her lower abdomen
Black Scale
grow
Army,
slowly.
the most
and
mysterious
waited for the day
and
when
powerful
he would come
men
with her
of
sacrifice in
expectation.
Tantai
However,
family.
she had
Father
forgotten
actually
that her
decided
situation
to
was
use
not
the
one
Black
that a
Scale
small,
ordinary
Tantai was
life
slightly
could survive
shocked.
in. His worries were
5 months
swept
old.
away.
The
in an
breath
instant.
of life in
Yes,
her
father.
lower abdomen
Not long
no
after,
longer increased.
Tantayu
But
left
because of the
Imperial
harsh
study.
environment of
As soon as he
tactical
walked out of
matrix
the Imperial Garden,
reincarnation,
he
it
saw
began
Commander
to disappear
Sue
with a
serious
slowly,
face,
No,
waiting
it
silently
can't dissipate.
in front of the palace
At that
gate.
moment,
Commander
Sue
Sue
felt
felt
as if her heart
greeted
was
him
cut by
when
a
he saw
knife.
him. He
The scene of
saluted
losing her
directly.
son in her
Your
previous
Royal
life
Highness
reappeared,
Tantayu was
adding
in a trance
another
for a
scar.
moment.
She
couldn't
remembered
bear
the
to lose
disappointment
her child
and
again.
disdain
Since
on
ordinary
Commander
life
Sue's face
can't survive,
when he took Sue
then
Lee into the
I
palace
will let you
rashly.
become a rare
Today,
dragon
it was a completely
or
different
phoenix.
scene.
Without
Tantayu
thinking
didn't have
for too
time to
long,
sigh.
Sue
He
Lee made
raised
a
Commander
crazy
Sue's
decision.
waist,
Then
and said,
all the
Commander
opportunities,
Sue, including
please
the
stand
life
up.
ring,
I will rely on
tactical
you
matrix
and
of
your black scale
reincarnation
army in the
and
future.
bloody elixir.
Commander
were
Sue's body
transmitted
was
to the
slightly
unformed
stiff,
life
but he
in
still
her
bent
lower
down.
abdomen.
He
through
said
her body.
dryly,
But how
you
can
can't
ignore the
Xian
etiquette?
Qing,
An
Tantayu's
ancient
cultivation
existence
within
couldn't
different
stop
bloodlines.
Commander Sue.
Empathize
He had to
with
wait
the
for
pain of
Commander
loss.
Sue to
So
finish
after
the
a
salute.
long silence,
Tantayu asked,
Sue finally
Commander
said
Sue,
lightly,
Father
"My
has told me
life
to
is in my
deal
own
with the
hands."
affairs of the family.
How is the
opened his
situation
mouth
now?
and said
Commander
nothing for a
Sue
while.
was
slightly serious when he heard the words. He stretched out his hand to dismiss
Chapter
the accompanying
315.
black scale guards
Qi
behind him.
Xianqing and the old
Tantayu
beggar
also
left,
dismissed,
but they didn't take
all the
Sue
eunuchs.
Lee's
In an
son
instant,
away.
there
It
were
was
only
probably
two of them
because
on
the
palace
movement
road.
was too big
Your
this
Royal
time,
Highness,
and they couldn't
in fact,
guarantee
the
that they would
affairs
not
of
be
the
noticed
family
by
are
the mirror
finished.
spirit.
Commander
If the
Sue
mirror
took a
spirit
slight
noticed
breath
Sue
and said a fact
Lee's
that
son in
shocked
advance,
Tantayu. It was not
why
a good thing.
didn't
for
Prime
you.
Minister
Sue
he know
took
how
her
to
son out of
resist?
practice and didn't
Commander
contact
Sue
with
thought
others of what he
she
saw
only
yesterday.
asked Fang Yuan to
There was a
come
hidden
over and talk
fear
with him for
in his
the night.
eyes. In
He
everyone's
explained in a low
ardent
voice,
expectation,
"Your Royal
only
Highness,
Fang Yuan
you may not
came
know.
out of the attic.
Just yesterday,
No, there was
all
also
the
the
influential
crying
people of
baby in
his
his
family
arms.
disappeared
In Shiwedong was
mysteriously,
stunned,
including
and looked at the
Queen
baby in
Jinwei,
surprise.
who had been banished.
She
to
couldn't
the
help
cold
asking,
palace.
"Where is
What did you
Sue
say?"
Lee?"
Although
Although
they
he
didn't
opened
talk
his
to
eyes
Sue Lee,
wide,
they
and
all
couldn't
saw
help
Sue
but
Lee
raise his
and
voice.
Fang Yuan
He
talking
Jinwei
at him.
was
Why
banished
was he
to
the
the
only
cold
one
palace.
who came out at night?
Anyway,
Fang
she
Yuan
was his
pursed
father's
his
woman.
lips tightly.
How could she
At this
disappear
moment,
casually?
compared with
At
his
this
usual
moment,
indifference,
Tantayu
he had a lot of
subconsciously
unwillingness
thought
and
of
sadness
mystery
that couldn't
thinking
be
of that
explained.
person's great
However,
power.
no
The
matter
shock
how
on
much
his
his
face
heart was
immediately
bleeding
faded
and how much he
a lot.
wanted to destroy
It
the
seems
world,
that you have
he
understood.
didn't show it on his
Your
face.
Royal Highness.
Facing
Commander
Yin
Shu said at
Xuedong's
the right
question,
time. He shook
I
his
heard
head
that there's a
blankly
person
and
in the
said,
Leanly
"She has
building
left.
who has a deep
It's
grudge
urgent
with the He family."
But before she left,
after being valued
she
by
told me the
Mr.
next
Lee,
arrangement.
he returned to
of
the
Leanly
Tianji
building.
country
Time
and
is pressing.
immediately
Let's
killed
go back
the He
first.
family.
In
The He
Shiwedong
family was
and
wiped
others
out
didn't
before
doubt
they
him
could do anything,
and immediately went
and then
back.
just yesterday,
At the same time,
people of
they were
Leanly
relieved.
building
It
took
seemed that Su
Jinwei from
Lee's
the
crisis
palace,
had passed,
and He Tian,
and the
who
Leanly
was in the
building
mansion
didn't
of
need to
Tantian
worry
City.
about being leaderless.
All the people in charge of the
Fang
He
Yuan,
family are gone.
who is this child?
And the remaining
Chu
people are
Qingming
like
couldn't
a
help
group of
but
dragons
ask.
without a
It was
leader.
too strange.
They won't
that
be
there
able
was
to
a
stir up
child
inexplicably.
As
Fang
long as
Yuan
your
looked
Highness
down at the baby
send
who was
someone to
tired
clean
of
up the
crying.
mess,
His
the
eyes were
great
full
merit
of love
killing the
and
rebellious
hatred.
family.
He hated
will
so much that
immediately
he was
be in your
crazy.
pocket. This
Commander
child was
Sue's
Ling
words were
Lee's
full of
son,
anger,
but he also
and
loved
expectation.
him because the
Although he
blood
didn't
flowing
have
in
the
his
right
body
to choose
was
his
Su
master.
Lee's.
He also wanted to see
Eldest
whether
brother,
the crown prince
Fang Mu
appointed by
reminded,
his majesty
Fang Yuan
and Mr.
suddenly
Lee had the
came
ability
to his sense.
to ascend the throne.
After a moment of silence,
Tantayu closed his
he said,
eyes and
"I will
sighed
raise
softly.
this child."
His heart was
personally.
cold.
He
In
won't
just half a
cause
month,
any trouble.
all the changes
You don't need to worry
flashed
about
in
him.
front of him.
Then,
Finally,
he left. He fixed his eyes on
regardless
Sue
of
everyone's
Lee's
reaction.
face.
At this moment, Chu
Even if he
Qingming
was
shook
slow,
his head and said,
he should be aware
falling
that the
flowers
suddenly
are
clear
longing for
road in
love,
front of him,
but the
was
heartless
mostly
stream
related to his
is
junior
heartless.
sister apprentice.
Fang Yuan,
Although he didn't know
you
what the
are really
relationship
depraved.
between Mr. Lee and
Don't
Su
say
Lee
that.
was, since
In
it was his
Shiwedong
junior
complained.
sister apprentice's
Seeing that
intention.
Fang Yuan's figure had
Tantayu's
disappeared
eyes
in the
flashed,
spiritual boundary,
and his tone
she could
became
not help
overbearing
but
for the
sigh.
first time.
It was not difficult to guess who the child's parents were.
Chapter 3.
But if it was true, when
Fang Yuan's
Tantayu
life
dealt with
was
the
too
affairs of
bitter.
the He family
In the northern snow
it was
country
3
of the
days
true
later,
spirit world,
after returning
it was
to the
currently
palace.
winter. He knew
The wasteland
that Su Li
outside
had
the
left the
city
day
was covered in
before
snow.
yesterday, and the
He got a letter
world
from
was
Su
quiet.
Li from Tantai
The two
mainland.
soldiers guarding
What was
the
written
city
in the letter
rubbed
was
their
simple.
hands and cursed.
It was about taking care
This
of
damn
herself.
weather is
It
freezing
didn't mention
people to
anything
death.
about the He
If I didn't
family
have a
or his
Hoteon 8-stage
ascension to the
cultivation
throne.
now,
Tantai
you
wanted to ask her
to
that year.
death. Unfortunately, he was about to ascend.
As soon
to
as
the
he
throne.
said this,
He had
the
little
other
time
soldier
to
whose
sleep.
lips were
How would he have
purple
time
from
to go to
the
the
cold
Han
smiled
country in
bitterly
person?
and said,
As for the He
"You're at
family,
the 8th layer,
except for
and
some
I'm only at the
rumors that
7th
no
layer.
one believes
Every
is a
day,
topic of conversation
I'm covered in
among
injuries
people.
from a cold.
It had
Even my
disappeared
monthly
and
stipend
became a
is
taboo
used to treat
among
my
the
injuries.
officials in the
I really
imperial
can't
court.
live like this.
A few days later,
Just
in
bear
the
with
Ling
it.
Mansion,
The weather will be warmer in a
City,
few months.
the Han country.
The soldier rubbed his
Ling
hands
Mo,
hard again.
who was dressed
Suddenly,
as a servant,
he thought of something,
walked into the
and his
yard
eyes
with breakfast.
brightened.
I
He
heard
turned
that there was a
around
peerless
and saw
tactical
Ling
matrix
sitting
running
under the
in the
eaves
area of
and looking at the
Palace,
distance silently.
a big sect
Compared with
in the
half a
northern
month
snow
ago,
country. Ling
change
was
the
obviously
sky
much
and the
thinner.
earth.
Ling
Spring
Mo
all
could
year
feel
round.
the faint
It's
sense
really a
of
place of
irritation
immortals.
emanating
If
from
I can go there once in my
distance.
life,
If the
I will
young
die
madam
for it.
doesn't come back,
The soldier
Ling
with
Mo
purple lips
shook his head
smiled
slightly
and was about to say
He
something.
handed the plate
Suddenly,
to Mammy,
his eyes
Lee,
straightened,
who was guarding
and he
beside
pointed
him.
to a black
He tightened
spot
the
in
white
the
ribbon
vast
on the hilt
snow
of the sword
outside the city.
and slowly
He
walked
exclaimed,
over.
"What's that?"
Seeing Ling,
The other person was
Mo,
also startled.
Lingly relaxed
He used his
eyebrows
eyesight
and
to
restrained
look,
his irritation
and
slightly.
as the black
He
duck
glanced at the
gradually
white
approached,
ribbon
he
and
saw the
said
silhouette
slowly,
clearly.
"How is it going?"
He immediately
Ling
said
Mo
in
bowed
bewilderment,
his head slightly.
"It looks like a
and
person."
said in a low voice,
"What seems to be?"
"The
"It's a
families of
person."
Lioi
The
have
two were
settled down."
shocked. Those
and
who have no
immediately went
family
around the
members
city
are
wall
buried
to
together
open the gate.
with the brothers
At
who
the same
joined the
time,
cult
they were
with
also
them.
puzzled.
Lingley
How
nodded
could someone
slightly
come to the snow
and
country
didn't feel
in this
sad.
weather?
He had
But
been
there was no
accustomed to
doubt
death
that the
for
person who
many
could
years.
withstand the extremely
Mo
cold
hesitated
wind
a
and
little
snow
and said,
was
"The
definitely
spy
a
sent to
senior, but they
Tianji
couldn't
country
afford to
hasn't got the
offend.
news
Not
of the
long
young
after the
madam
two
yet.
of them opened
But
the city gate.
I heard that
A black-clothed young girl
walked
walked
the
through a
crown
snowstorm.
prince.
Her
It won't be
skin was
long
pale
before he
and
becomes the next
translucent
emperor
like
of
crystal,
Tianji country.
perfectly blending
Can't I
in
you?"
with the snow.
Lingley narrowed
Her
his
cold
long
and indifferent
narrow
expression
eyes.
directly
He remembered that this
pierced into the
person
hearts
was
of the
Su
two,
Lee's
causing
senior
them
fellow
to
apprentice,
shiver
and
uncontrollably.
he was very concerned about
"Oh my
Su
God!
Lee.
Where
Since
does
he
this
could be
iceberg
appointed
beauty
as the
come
crown
from?
prince?
Why is it colder
It showed
than
that
the
his
snow?"
power in
The
Tianji
soldier
country
murmured to
was
himself
very great,
and watched
the
the girl in
possibility of
black
Su Lee
leave.
encountering
He
danger
felt relieved
was very
and was
small.
about to close the
But
door.
It's been
But
16
he saw the girl
days.
stop and
Why
look at
didn't
him.
she send back
At
any
this
news?
moment, the
Are you gonna
soldier's
stay in
hair
Tianji
stood on
country
end
and not come back?
as if he was stared
Lingley
at by
muttered
an
to
ancient
himself.
beast.
The
He
more
couldn't
he
move,
said, and was
the
frightened.
gloomier his face
I
was.
ask you, where's
Even a
Shaoshan
trace of
Palace?
his pneuma leaked
Shaoshan
out
Palace.
and hit Ling.
The soldier
and
shivered,
Ling
Mo's face suddenly
subconsciously
turned
pointed
pale,
in the direction
and he stepped
heard.
back a dozen
Whoosh.
steps to stabilize
The girl's
his body.
figure disappeared
Young master,
instantly, Ling
as if she had
Mo
never
shouted
appeared.
helplessly.
Did we meet
He
a
hadn't
ghost?
recovered from his
The
injury,
two soldiers
so
looked
he
at each
couldn't
other
bear the
and
torment.
only felt that their
Lingley
mouths
came
were
to his
dry.
sense.
What they
and
saw
saw
today
Ling Mo's
became
pale
the most
face.
peculiar
He apologized
experience
and
in
said,
their ordinary lives.
"Yes, you can't
The
use
girl in
Shandong
black
yet.
was Su Lee.
I'm sorry."
She walked alone in the wind.
Ling
and
Mo
snow
shook
and
his
silence.
head.
How could he
After
care
a few
about
days,
such a little
she
thing?
stopped
At
and
this
looked at
time,
the holy mountain
Mammy Lee
of
came over and
Shaoshan
said,
Palace through the
"Master,
layers of illusory
breakfast
tactical
is ready.
matrix.
Come and eat.
900 points
Don't
of
worry about
foundation left."
Mississippi."
Su Lee
She has to
whispered
treat
to herself
Lord Ling
after
Mo.
closing her
She will come back
eyes
soon.
to sense it.
She won't leave you alone.
Yes.
Lingley
After the
responded
blood
with a
elixir
heavy
was
heart.
transmitted
Ling
into her
Mo
son's body,
pushed the
it was
wheelchair
completely
to send him
quiet.
to the table.
She spent
He looked
several
at the
months
dishes on the
to
table,
get back more
but he
than
had no
1,000 points of
appetite.
foundation.
He barely
She hurried
picked up a
with
dish
all
with
her
chopsticks
strength
and
put it in
spent
his
more
mouth.
than 100 points.
He also felt
the
bitter
foundation
and
is
difficult
more
to swallow.
durable than before.
When Su Lee said
Su
that
Lee
she
calculated
would leave
for a
and
month.
found this,
He didn't
maybe
feel
it was the
anything.
effect of the
After
tactical
all,
matrix.
he had been to the
of
border of
absolute
Nanjiang
sky.
country for
But at
many
this point,
days.
she had
So he
no
didn't
time
think
to care
it was
about
difficult.
these details.
But he didn't expect
Old
that
ancestor
going out to do
of
things
Shaoshan
and
Palace
waiting at home.
Su Lee
were two
squinted her
completely
eyes
different
and
concepts.
walked straight
Only
to
after
Shaoshan
half a
Palace.
month.
He
Although
felt that
Jing
every day
Xian
was like a
said
year.
that the old
Every
ancestor
day,
Shaoshan
he
Palace
thought about
had
the little
temporarily
things
given up
with
contact
Su Lee
with
and
the
the past
Dongfang
half a year.
family.
He
and
wanted to
hidden the
see
palace,
Su Lee
but
so much that
who
he
could
almost
guarantee
went crazy.
that after she left,
Seeing that he didn't
the
want to
old
eat
ancestor
or drink,
of Shaoshan Palace
Xiaoming
would
came
not
over
come back
and
said that
attacked
he was
the
lovesick.
cult.
Then she
Both
put
the
down
old
the medicine
beggar
given
and
by
the
the
doctor
doctor
were weak.
and left
If
with
the
a
news was
smile
known by
covering her
Shaoshan
mouth.
Palace,
In
even if
Xiaoming's
Ema
view,
cult,
her son
and the
just
Lingli
happened to
building
have
were tied
indigestion.
together.
In
the
the past
past
10 years,
Shaoshan
he had
Palace.
visited more than
Thinking of
1,000
this,
brothels.
Su Lee's killing
Even if he
intense
married
sword.
a beautiful
Shaoshan
woman
Palace
now,
must die.
he would never be a devoted
Otherwise,
person.
she couldn't
According
leave
to what she has
peacefully.
seen in these years,
Who are you?
she would never
How dare you
think
break
that her
into my
sons,
Shaoshan
who had visited
Palace
brothels
Tell me your
countless
purpose,
times,
or I won't
actually
forgive
kept their
you.
chastity
As soon as she
and
passed
didn't
through
even
the
give their
illusion
virginity.
matrix.
At this moment,
Many elders
there was
in
a sudden
Shaoshan
noise
Palace were
outside the
immediately
east
shocked.
courtyard. In the
Lingley
blink of an
raised
eye,
his head and
several
looked outside.
rainbows flew
He saw
to
a
her.
beautiful figure
Su
that
Lee
he
glanced
missed
at them.
so much
10
suddenly
people at the
stepped in.
peak of the inborn realm
realm,
Ling Li
and
was stunned.
3
And
in
then
the
he couldn't help
longevity
showing
realm.
joy
It
on his
deserved to be the
face.
first
He
force
stood up from the
in
wheelchair and
spiritual
said,
circle.
"You're back."
However, if
Before
all these
Ling
people
Li
died,
finished his words,
the
he was
old
pressed by
ancestor
Su Li's
Shaoshan
shoulders
Palace
and
sat
sat
back
back
in the wheelchair.
Su Li's face
Then
was
Xiao
cold.
Meng
At the
followed
moment
him into the
when many
room
elders
in the next
stopped,
moment.
she pulled
Seeing
out
that
the
her
sword in her
daughter-in-law
hand.
hugged her son
Boom!
as soon
An
as she came
earth-shattering
back,
aura
and the couple got
instantly
along well.
enveloped the
Xiao
13
Meng was
people,
very happy,
causing this group
She
of
smiled
elders
so happily
who usually
that her
lived
eyes
like
turned
princes
into crescent
to turn
moons.
pale with fright.
Li, you want to find a
No,
way to cure
she
Ling
is a senior
MO
in the
these
late
days,
stage
but
of
Ling Li was
longevity
worried
realm.
about you.
Retreat.
He didn't have a good meal
Go to
these
ask
days,
the Grand Elder,
and he lost a
Only
lot
the
of
senior
weight.
in the supernatural
Xiao Meng
realm
sat next
can
to her
capture the
and
demon
said a
girl
lot of good
at
things
one
about
stroke.
Ling Li.
The elders who
Ling
had just
Li's
stopped
ears
saw
were
that the
red,
situation was
and
not
then she
good
left contentedly
and ran away quickly.
As soon as Xiao
But
Meng
Su Li had the
laughed,
intention to kill
Ling
them,
Li felt that the
so she
person
wouldn't
in
let
his
them go.
arms left
She
quickly.
increased her
He
strength
couldn't help
from
but feel a sense
to
of
20%.
If he
and her
could,
body movement
he would rather
suddenly
hold her like
increased.
this and
She
never
flashed
let go
in
of her
front of the
forever.
elder who escaped
Unfortunately,
the fastest.
He knew
and
that
indifferently
everything
raised
was an
the
illusion.
sword to cut
Suli
down.
glanced at
You have no
Mammy
chance.
Lee,
Go
and
to
the
hell.
latter immediately
Boom.
understood
A burning
and
light
left with
like
the
the
rest
sun
of the maids.
burst out from the tip
Except
of
for
the
Ling
sword,
Li,
and
only
quickly
Ling Mo
enlarged
was
in front
left.
of the elder.
No,
Suli sat down
the elder
opposite the
only
table
let out a
and
scream
took out a bottle of elixir
and was
from her
completely
arms.
drowned by the sword
She said,
light.
"After
Suli
I went
didn't
to Tinji
stop
country
and continued
I
to
found
kill
that
the
my
remaining
master
elders.
had left. After the
But by
tactical
chance,
matrix,
I found
of
a suitable
Jution,
prescription.
her realm
Ling
had
Mo,
far exceeded the
take this
level of
bottle
the
of
longevity
elixir.
realm.
Take
She
one
couldn't
every
estimate
day
her
and
specific
refine it.
strength.
Your meridians will be healed after 7
However,
days.
no
At
matter
that
whether
time,
they reach the
you can
supernatural
gradually
realm
restore
or
Xiangong.
not.
These
Don't be
elders
anxious.
who were only in
Ling
the
Mo's
first
eyes
and
brightened
second
when he heard the
words.
longevity realm.
He took the
had
bottle
no
respectfully
strength to
and
escape
said,
in front of her.
"Thank you
Which
for the elixir,
Excellency
madam."
Gu Zhou
Suli
came
nodded
to
and
visit
looked
my
back to
palace.
Ling Li.
Please
Under
be
the
merciful.
expectant gaze
In the
of
middle
Ling
of
Li,
killing,
she
a
quietly
terrible
finished her
Numa
breakfast
finally
and
rose
left
in the
without
forbidden
saying
area
a word.
of the Shaoshan
The smile
Palace.
on Ling Li's
Suli
face
stopped and
froze.
stood in the nothingness,
After a long time,
looking at it calmly.
He slowly picked
Since
up the
the old
chopsticks
ancestor of the
and
Shaoshan
ate up
Palace had
every
come
plate
out,
of breakfast
she didn't
that
need to
Suli had
waste her
tasted.
foundation anymore.
Ling Mo held
However,
the elixir
in less
and
than a
watched
breath,
those sweet
the
snacks
space in
being
front of
stuffed into
Suli
Ling
was
Li's mouth
distorted
by
for a
Ling Li.
moment. No
And
matter
then
how
an
he
old
looked
man
at
in a green
he felt that
robe
master
stepped
was
out.
eating
After
Coptic
seeing
Chinenses.
Suli,
His triangular
Master,
eyes
Ling
immediately
said
glowed,
dryly,
and
he hesitated
for a long time
eyes,
and said
at the same
awkwardly,
time,
I think
didn't
that
forget to
Madam has
say,
been out for a long
"Why
time.
are these
I'm
unpresentable
afraid that she
juniors
recalled a
so
lot of the
angry?"
past.
After
So
a
she
moment,
reverted to
the
her
old man in a
ways.
green robe
She must have
seemed
you in
to
her
see
heart.
something.
Master, you I
and his
know.
eyes suddenly
Ling Li put
fixed
down the bowl and
Your
chopsticks,
Excellency,
and suddenly
who
said,
are you?
His
I know
eyes were
almost
full of
all the
calmness
practitioners of
without
the
the
Guizhou
previous
province like the
irritation.
back of my hand.
Then he smiled and
Why
said,
have
in a
I never
clear
seen
voice,
you?
In
Ling
your
Mo,
own age.
I know what you said.
A faint smile
It's
appeared
ridiculous
on
that
Suli's
no matter
face,
how she
and
treats
she was
me,
extremely cold.
as long as she
You
is
ask me
with
who
me,
I am?
as
I am
long as
the one who will kill
I can look
you.
at her, it's enough.
Boom. A
I am
wave
very
that was
patient.
100 times
If 1 year
stronger
is not
than
enough
before
to
broke
heal the
out
pain in her
without
heart,
warning.
then
In an
2 years.
instant, the
If 2
surrounding
years is
palaces
not
and
enough,
pavilions
then
were
a
shaken
lifetime
into powder.
I have broken
and
through to the
countless
longevity
disciples
realm,
of the Shaoshan
and my
Palace
lifespan
died.
has been increased
The old
by
ancestor of the
200
Shaoshan Palaces
He has
face
reached the
changed
peak
greatly.
of the acquired realm.
This momentum
at a young age.
was no less
She
than
will
the
certainly
supernatural
break through
realm.
in the future.
Damn it! You
can
dare
afford
to
to
attack
wait.
me.
Feeling
Aren't you
afraid
afraid
of being
being
suppressed
suppressed
to
to
death
death
by the
reincarnation
Ling
mirror?
Mo's worries disappeared.
Under the premise
He
of the
nodded
agreement,
heavily and
the
said in his
ancient
heart,
existence
"I
didn't
hope
expect
I can
that
live to see
Suli
the
would
day
attack him.
when Master
Almost
and
all
Madam
of
are
Su
back
Li's
together."
attacks hit him.
In the
But
backyard,
even so,
Mammy
after
Lee
the thoughtfully
fast wave
prepared
passed,
hot water, although
for
the old
Suli
ancestor
to
of the
wash
Shaoshan
away her
Palace was
fatigue.
covered with blood,
Suli's
clothes
and
were
some
all
injuries,
taken off. His
and
limbs
steam
were
was
still
rising.
intact.
She
He
leaned
flashed
back
back
against the bath
and wanted
wall.
to keep a distance
Her
from
thick
Suli.
and curly
Suli
eyelashes
frowned
trembled
slightly.
slightly.
She attacked
Then she
with
opened
all
her
her
eyes,
strength,
showing
but
a
the
touch of
old
fatigue.
ancestor of the
The trip
Shaoshan
to
Palace
Tianji
was
country
only
seemed to be
injured.
easy.
The
But it took a
existence
lot
of
of
the ancient
effort
level
to talk
was
with the
really
ancient
not so
existence.
easy to kill.
What's more,
Sensing
since
that there
you
was
met
still more than
Tiantai Feng
half
for
of
the
the
first
foundation,
time,
she
Su
contacted
Li's
him many
eyes
times.
showed determination.
Every time she tested
Originally,
him,
she
she wanted to go
with a
back
strong
to have a
man.
look after
After
finishing
returning
this
to
thing.
Yunjing
But
City,
now, she really had a moment of
with a
relaxation.
deafening shout between
Clatter,
heaven and
with
earth,
a light sound
the
of
old
water,
ancestor of
a
the
white
Shaoshan
and
Palace
delicate
was
jade
horrified to
arm
see
appeared in
that
the
Su
water.
Li's body
Suli looked
was
down
ignited
and
with
was
a
stunned
layer
for a
of
moment.
white flame.
He suddenly
Then she
thought of
slowly
something
stabbed
and
her wrist
immediately
with her
shouted in
fingertips,
horror,
and then
burned the
nothing
foundation.
appeared.
She
You were an
tightened her
outsider.
lips,
You were
and there was a
actually
sense of hesitation in her eyes. But this hesitation only lasted for less
Chapter
than a breath.
316.
And then,
In
completely
the Shaoshan
disappeared.
Palace,
Countless
what did the old
palaces
beggar mean?
collapsed.
Suli
and the
gently
earth veins were
breathed
broken,
out a turbid
shaking
breath,
thousands of miles.
and her eyes became
Even the
clear
small
again.
city
She
of
thought
the
for a
snow
moment.
country at
In
the
fact,
foot of the
she
divine
returned to
mountain
Yunjing
could
City
feel
yesterday.
the shaking. But she stayed in
Countless
a lonely
ordinary
building.
mortals
After the
and
matter of the
low-level
Luo
warriors
family was
settled.
escaped from their houses
Luo
and
Yingyin
stood
also
on the street,
followed Luo
looking at the
Yichen
source of
to
the
join the
earthquake
lonely
with
building.
uncertainty.
Luo
That
Yichen's
direction
childhood is
friend,
the Shaoshan
a
Palace.
young man named
Did
Fan
something
Tianxing
happen to the
also
Shaoshan
join
Palace?
Suli didn't pay too much
Impossible.
attention to
The
them.
Shaoshan Palace
Her energy
is a powerful
was not
force.
infinite.
It is
Now
known
all
as
her
the
spirit
first
was
in the
restrained by the
spiritual
reincarnation
circle.
mirror.
How could it be
and the
attacked
life
to its
ring?
base camp?
And she had no
Whether
time
it
to care
is or
about
not,
other things.
we will know
At her
after a
request,
while.
all
The
the
news would
disciples
come out
in the
eventually.
Leanly building
At this
showed
moment,
their life
above
above
the
the
divine
divine
mountain.
mountain. The number
The old
reached
ancestor of the
90%,
Shaoshan Palace
and the remaining
fled
10%
crazily,
were the creatures
but there were
in the
still
illusion.
countless scars
Among the
on his
90%,
body. In the blink of an
distribution
eye,
of the color
he
of the
was
life
seriously
ring
injured.
was also the
Suli
same
burned her
as that of the
foundation,
Nanjiang country.
and her combat power
Most of them were light
increased
blue
several times,
and a few were dark
At the
blue.
beginning,
the
Qingyi,
old ancestor of the Shaoshan Palace could resist with the trump card in his hand.
Mei Ru
But as
hand,
time went by,
and Fan
the
Tianxing
protective
were all
treasure in
orange.
his hand
Only Fang
exceeded the
Yuan showed the same red as her burst. The old ancestor very Shaoshan Palace, not as red as her blood, immediately smelled the killed breath of many people of the Luo regardless of the loss of the treasure. The old people she brought back were all outsiders with suppressed his anger. If the space in the spiritual realm fellow practitioner was not enough, what is the irreconcilable hatred between us? After coming out of the die with me regardless of Suli was very surprised to meet the old beggar who told we have to hurt each other many years ago. Suli heard the old ancestor of the old beggar didn't pretend to be crazy, and then a more violent attack burst from his sword, as if he felt sorry for her. Maybe not before. If you capture and imprison outsiders, if I let you go, you'll never let me go. The mirror she didn't know the details of the old ancestor of the Shaoshan Palace. I've already got the worst, but she knew his temperament. Even if the mirror spirit notices it, he was narrow-minded, vengeful, at worst, and extremely protective. Little girl, after Ling Li, what do you want to do? The Dongfang you appeared in front of me. As long as the old ancestor of the Shaoshan Palace knew that there was no threat to him, he would not mind to destroy any weak existence. The night was as cold as water to him. Under the silent night sky, did not stop. The cold moonlight shone more fiercely and reflected the old ancestor of the Shaoshan Palace. Who had always wanted to calm down, smiled sweetly, was completely desperate. Old man, then it has nothing to do with you whether what I do his heart broke out like a flood. If you just want to save Junior, you are just like an ant. Accompany you. If you really want to die, the old beggar was slightly stunned. In the end, he seemed to be surprised that Suli was still so rude to him after turned into an inhuman roar. But he soon recovered and laughed. His skinny body immediately swelled like an old beggar. His clothes burst in the blink of an eye. You can do whatever you want. And he turned into a behemoth that was taller than the central hall. This old beggar will lend you a Shaoshan Palace. Help me? Malala. Suli raised her white scales appeared on the surface of the skin. Can you help me to deal with the old ancestor? She flew hundreds of meters away. The old beggar's face saw the monster clearly turn green. The old ancestor almost choked by Suli sect. Then he turned around, shifty-eyed, slipped away. Monster. Little girl, remember, there are no absolutes. What kind of monster is this? If you can grasp it, even collapsed the central hall. Come back from the dead. Our old ancestor is actually a demon. No wonder there are human warm bath water with one hand. Run and frown slightly. I actually cultivated. She murmured a few words for 100 couldn't understand it. How her current situation was as soon as the old ancestor of the Shaoshan Palace, it was a complete showed his real body. If she wanted to get a chance at the Shaoshan Palace, she must master a trace of the natural law. Many of the natural laws were at a loss and forgot to dodge. How could she find a trace of the blood by the old ancestor of the Shaoshan Palace? It didn't sound possible at all. After transforming into the original silent bathroom, old ancestor of Shaoshan back could no longer finally calm down to deal with the affairs of the cult that piled up. His big eyes were bloodthirsty. He waved when he looked through the intelligence sent by many elders and disciples who had he became more and more to the mountain-protecting tactical the Nanjiang smashed into a cloud of blood mist suddenly became quiet, and all traders must die. Materials, the old ancestor of the Shaoshan Palace roared. It seemed that they wanted to stop the war. Although his body was huge, do you know what's going on? His speed Ling Li handed the file, but became faster. Ling in the blink of an eye, rolled his eyes. There were only a few living creatures left. Even if you care about Suli, you should at least take a look at the frontier intelligence. Suli stood in the air behind the crazy. The news is out of date. Her face was paler than before. Then her wrists took out another file from the table, and light Ling Li took it and immediately opened. The destruction of the Shaoshan Palace could be said to be caused by his face changed, but she did not feel guilty at all. The monarch of Nanjiang country, in order to fulfill her wish. When did this happen? Already become Ling Qinglong frowned and shook his head. He said, principles, I don't know, as in the previous the strength of the Lu family is 300 than that of the Wu family and the Ma family. The feeling of dying had never been so clear. It is impossible for them to maybe as long as she waved her sword 3 times with all her strength. According to the change she would die completely. The change of the Lord however, in Nanjiang after the old ancestor coincide with the palace return when he went to save his second brother. His defense power was greatly I suspect that it was the joyful 3 swords couldn't even break his scales. Ling Qinglong if the old ancestor of the Shaoshan Palace and hadn't become less intelligent. A few days ago, noticed the brothers lurking she might have been seriously injured back the news that the Lord of the Lianshire cult suddenly took a group of elites. Suli frowned and clenched the hilt of the sword. She still took it for granted. There's been no her memory told her the rest of the people in the Lianshire cult region either left was no more than 1,000 years. He's no longer a threat. Even if she could gather all the foundation in an instant, Ling Li she might not be the opponent. He had heard of that dangerous place, Shaoshan Palace. Since the Lianshire cult, not to mention the less than they couldn't come out in a short foundation. There was no need to worry about it. What he should pay attention to now was why the Lianshire Suli's face showed a touch of regret. Then suddenly, it is impossible for the Hawan sect. There was a sense of familiarity cult to this extent. At the same time, with the strength of the old ancestor of the Shaoshan, it is still not enough to bring still raging on the Holy Family. let out a
Langley
roar
rubbed
in
his
a panic.
eyebrows with a
Then he
headache.
clawed the ground.
He didn't pay attention to
crazily.
the intelligence
In the
for
blink of
more
an
than
eye,
10 days.
half of his
He
body
didn't expect
was
that the
submerged
situation in the
ground.
world had changed.
He wants to
beyond
escape.
recognition. Investigate.
First,
Su Li's
investigate
eyes
what
suddenly
happened in
brightened.
Tingu City.
She did not
half a
hesitate
month
to
ago.
raise the sword
Send
in
someone
her
to
hand.
secretly
She
test
rushed
the
out
details
and slashed
of
at the
Liu
ground.
family. This
At the same
slash
time,
evaporated
pay
200
close attention to the
foundation,
movements
but the
of
result
Hawan
was
sect.
obvious.
If it is
An
the old
unprecedented
Lord Yi
shock
who did
passed into the
it
ground.
will not stop
and
here.
a big hole
Ling
appeared in
Qingyuan
the
was
ground,
shocked, which
and
just
nodded
made the
heavily.
head of the old
There was no
ancestor of the
omission
Shaoshan
in Ling
Palace
Li's decision.
reappear. With his order,
Roar.
the
A
huge
roar
and
of
tight
fear
machine of
far
the Yinma
greater
cult
than anger
immediately
came
from
from
his
his
mouth. But the Hawan
Then,
sect,
before he
seemed
continued
to
to
disappear.
sink into the
no
ground,
matter how Ling
everything
searched,
suddenly became
he couldn't find
quiet.
any clues
To be
about
precise,
the Hawan sect.
everything was
Ling
still,
had to give up helplessly.
except Su Li, who was
there was
still
no
gasping.
war in the frontier.
Su Li looked
so he didn't
down
need
at
to
her
be distracted by
almost
visible
invisible
hands.
He
He concentrated
looked
on
up at the
dealing with the
clouds in the
Dongfang
sky.
family.
There,
With Su Li by
a
his
face
side,
appeared.
time
It was
passed
not a human
unconsciously.
face.
In
or
a
the
blink of
face
an
of
eye,
any creature
another
in the
year
world.
passed. At least
Mammy
in
Li
Su
counted
Li's
with her
memory,
fingers.
there was no
The
such
miss and the
creature.
son-in-law
But she
had
felt
been
that this
married for
face
more
was
than a year and a
extraordinarily
half.
harmonious.
It had been 4 years
as if
since
it was
she
the most
rescued
perfect
Su
combination
Li from the
between
wooden
heaven
house
and earth.
outside the Daisa
The
town.
inferior
Time
demon
really passed by
imprisoned
quickly.
the Shaoshan
Mammy Li
Palace,
sighed.
showed its
Suddenly,
original body,
she saw
and
Chiu
disturbed
Meng
the
leave the
reincarnation
east
courtyard with a
mirror
worried
realm.
face.
You should die.
Followed
Su
by
Li's
Doctor.
pupils shrank
Madam
suddenly.
comes to
as the
urge
cold
again.
mechanical
It's no
voice
wonder.
resounded
They have
in
been
her
married
ears.
for so long.
The Shaoshan
But there is no
Palace,
movement
who was still
in the
desperately
belly of the
fleeing.
mist. If it were
Directly
me, I
dissipated.
would also be worried.
Like a fragile
Mammy Li
sand
muttered
sculpture.
strangely.
It drifted
and went back to
away
the kitchen
with the
to
wind
prepare
after
snacks.
being air-dried.
She had been with
Except
Su
for a little
Li
ash
for the longest time.
there was no trace
Although
left.
she didn't learn much
Witnessing
about the
this
skills of the
scene,
miss,
even
the
Su
snacks
Li,
she made were
who was
much more
fearless
delicate than
couldn't
those
help
of other
but
cooks.
feel a throb.
Madam
in her heart.
Dowager, what kind of means
Madam
was this?
Dowager, like
the
the
power of
Maoist.
words. This year,
Even in
there
the
was not
Jiuzhou
much
region,
change in the
there was
Han country.
absolutely no such a terrifying
Although the
existence
health of
that
the
she had
emperor was
heard.
getting worse
What
year
on
by
earth
year.
was the reincarnation
Since the
mirror?
fifth prince was
Su Li
appointed
was
as the
silent
crown
and calmed
prince.
down.
The domestic
She would never know the
situation
answer.
was much more
It's you?
stable
Suddenly,
than in previous years.
a slightly
As for the
surprised
Tinji
voice
country
sounded in her
Nanjiang
ears,
country,
which
they
was a
were
little more
naturally
lively
calm.
than the mechanical
The relationship
voice
between the
just now.
three countries
Then, before
entered
Su Li
an
could respond,
unprecedented
a
period of
transmission
harmony.
wave
The Yinma
suddenly
cult
swept
took this
over,
opportunity to
and the
expand
face in the
its
sky
strength.
disappeared
Both the
without a
Shuelo
trace.
cult
And
and
the
the
Tingya
Tingya
house had made
some
great
warriors
progress.
finally dared
They
to
even
come to the
completely
Shaoshan
covered the
Palace to
Nanjiang
find out what
country
happened.
and stepped
When they
into
saw
the
the
territory
doomsday
of the
scene of
Tinji
blood
country.
and broken
In the
walls
true
on the
spirit
holy
realm,
realm, which
they
was
were
not
so
connected
scared
to the
that they
mortal
couldn't
world,
even speak.
the situation in
Since
the inner
then,
realm
the
had
news of the
changed
destruction of the
dramatically
Shaoshan
over the past
Palace
year.
spread
First of
throughout
all,
the real
the Ghost
spiritual
Circle, the
at a
second
very
force
fast
only
speed,
inferior
as
to
if
the
it had
Shaoshan
wings.
Palace and the spiritual
Everyone was
circle.
guessing
Suddenly
what kind of
announced the
existence
closure
could
of the
destroy
valley.
the number
All the
one
disciples who
power
were walking in the
real
outside
spiritual
world
circle
also
in one
returned to
day.
the valley. Thinking of the
And
horror behind
there was no
it,
sign
the
of
whole
going
spiritual
out.
circle
Rumors
fell
were
with the
everywhere
panic.
in the
In a
spiritual
reopened,
circle.
leanly
Some
building,
people said that the ghost
Fang
valley
Yuan
was
suddenly
suddenly
destroyed
destroyed
by
by
a
a
file from the
mysterious
Wanjian
vengeful
sect
person.
on the table.
Some
He
people
was
said
silent
that
for a
the
long
founder of the
time.
Ghost
When
Valley
the baby
returned to the
cried in
valley
the inner
to
room,
teach immortals.
he got up so
and
that all
walked
the
into the inner
disciples
room.
were recalled.
After
All
coaxing the
kinds of
child to
rumors were
sleep
more
again,
exaggerated
Fang
than the
Yuan
other,
looked at the dark
and
night
no one believed
outside the window.
Soon after,
and was silent
the
for a moment.
enthronement ceremony of the head of the Wanjian sect overshadowed.
Suddenly,
He closed the
Ghost
window.
Valley.
In
And
the name
then
of
nailed
head,
it.
when
He turned
King
over
Shan's
his
palm,
spread
and a
throughout
small
the
wooden
spiritual
memorial
circle
tablet by holding a
appeared in his
banquet
hand.
for 3
Then he put in the
days
gap of the
and
nailed
3
windowsill
At the
and
same
covered it with
time,
curtains.
the wife of the
No
head,
one could see the clue.
Ming Qing,
After doing
was
all
pregnant.
this,
It could be
Fang
said to be
Yuan
double
returned to the
happiness.
bed and sat
Su Li
down
asked
cross-legged.
Fang Yuan to
Su,
send the congratulatory
Li,
card.
if there's a next
and
life,
she had been staying
can I
in
wait
the
for
Ling
you?
mansion to practice.
There was a low murmur
Finally,
in the room.
at a certain
with
moment,
unspeakable
Su Li opened her
sadness and
eyes,
softness.
stopped running
No
the
one could
Shandong,
imagine that he,
and
who
stroked
had
her
always
slender
been
wrists with
decisive and
fingertips.
cold, would have such a
Foundation,
voice.
there are still
At this
4,000 in a golden
sigh of
palace with
relief.
no end.
Su Li got up,
Su Li
pushed
stood
the
in the
door
middle of the
open
hall
and went out.
and looked at
The
the
sunshine
existence in
outside
front of
was
her,
quite
whose
dazzling,
claws were
which made her
thousands of
squint.
times higher
The scenery in the courtyard
Was
in front of the
this
wing room
the mirror's
was as
spirit
lush
of
as
a
a
year ago?
reincarnation mirror.
The four
So they
words
took
extreme
breath,
prosperity
facing
and
this
then
existence. She
appeared
felt
in
small
Suli's mind.
as facing
Then
the
she seemed
sea.
to sense something
The pangolin
in her
demon,
footsteps,
which was
suddenly
hundreds of
stopped.
meters high,
Raising her
was
head,
only the
she
size
didn't
of
know
claw in front
when there
of
was
her.
a figure
There was
beside
such a
the quiet
huge monster
courtyard
in the
wall.
world.
Vicissitude,
If it was in the outside
loneliness,
world, even the
ragged
space
clothes,
of one region
disheveled hair, and
could
dirty
not
face,
accommodate
like a lonely
when
ghost.
Suli was amazed
The familiar
by the mirror's
face
spirit,
full of wrinkles,
the ancient existence
also
opened
opened
its
its
eyes
eyes different
and
looked at
gloomy
Suli.
Numa.
After
It was
a while,
him, A voice like a big bell
Master.
reverberated from
Su Li's
huge
pupils
palace.
shrank slightly.
I remember that
she
you
called
were the
softly.
human who woke me
Qi
up hundreds of
Xianqing
years ago.
immediately responded.
Su Li was slightly
His figure
stunned.
flashed to
in
the
her
front
memory
of Su Li.
She was the holy
He
girl
stared
in
at
that
Su
sect.
Li with
It was
his turbid
indeed
old
her
eyes,
who touched
and said
reincarnation
nothing.
mirror.
At this moment,
made a vision
Mammy Li
appear.
passed by the door.
I see.
And saw Su
There's
Li
a
standing
breath
in
of the
courtyard.
master in your soul.
Maybe
She
you are the
immediately
descendant
smiled
left
and
by the
said
master.
hello. But
Miss,
this breath
you
is
finally
too
know to come
weak,
out.
and you're about
Basking
to
in the
dissipate,
sun is
so
good
it is
for your
useless.
The
Su Li was
master of
slightly
reincarnation mirror.
She glanced at
Su Li had
Qi
doubts in
Xianqing,
her heart,
who was
but she
still
didn't
staring
ask.
at her. There were
And then
only
looked up at
dozens
Mammy
of
Li
points of
outside the
foundation
courtyard
left
door.
in her body.
From that angle,
and the speed of
she should see
dissipation
Qi
was
Xianqing's
accelerating.
back.
In a
Miss,
few
what's
minutes,
wrong
she
with
would
you?
die.
Mammy Li's
So it was
voice
useless to
interrupted
ask
her
so much.
thinking.
So
Originally,
Originally, I was
sense
still optimistic
and shook
about
her
you,
head.
and even let you
Nothing.
control a
I am
part of
thinking about
reincarnation
something.
mirror to do
You can go
things
ahead.
for me. After
Okay.
you pass the 9
Mammy Li didn't doubt
reincarnations,
her,
but
now
disappeared
the
outside
voice of the
door.
mirror spirit
Su Li's
suddenly
sight
became
returned
indifferent
to Qi
for
Xianqing.
nominal cultivation.
After a long
companion.
silence,
You chose to die.
She suddenly said,
I
"Ghost
misjudged
clan?
you. Qi
Since you
Xianqing's
chose to die,
eyes fluctuated.
don't be too reluctant
It seemed that
to
he had
leave
no
the world.
feet.
Let's
He
go."
floated to the side of Su Li. His voice was hoarse. He was totally different from the gentle
Chapter
and elegant old doctor in
317.
those days. The breath of
You
a
know
chess
Ghost
piece.
Clan?
Who told
After
you?
Su Li
Tantai
disappeared,
Su
the
Li
indifferent
simply
look
replied.
of the mirror
She was more and more
spirit
sure that her
gradually
cheap
showed a
master
touch of coldness.
in front of her
Is it a
had
conspiracy
already
remembered
remembered
his
me,
identity?
that she touched
Even if she
me.
lied,
It was one of
with
the
his
most
ability,
ancient
he could soon
existences
find
in
it
the
out
world and could
Ha!
sense the past.
It turns out to be
and
him.
the future.
Qi
Since
Xianqing
Su
laughed
Li entered the
wildly,
reincarnation
and his
mirror,
eyes burst
it
with
fell into a
unforgettable
deep
hatred.
sleep again.
He also
This
had
time
a
it
part
woke
of
up
destroying
on
my
the one
ghost
hand
clan
because of Shaoxin.
Su Li was
and
silent.
On the other
Qi
hand,
Xianqing
it
was
sensed
stunned.
the threat
He
from
suddenly
Su Li.
showed a mocking
What kind of
expression on his
existence
face
could pose a
and
threat
kept
to
laughing.
it? I
Certainly,
forgot that you were also
it
a
couldn't
human
be
clan. Su Li
he-
herself.
Su Li
The
slightly
answer
pursed
must
her
be
lips
that someone
and
behind
slightly
Su
lowered her chin.
Li was
Senior,
manipulating her.
why do
to
you
deal
come
with
here?
her? What did you call
Therefore,
me? When
after
Qi
it sensed
Xianqing
carefully
heard
and
Su
couldn't trace
Li's
the
words,
source,
he
it
was
made a prompt
immediately
decision
angry to
and
end
asked
Su
angrily.
Li's life. Su Li's
In this
expression
way,
didn't change.
the crisis
She
in the
said in a
dark
deep
voice
dissipated in advance.
I just what?
With the disappearance
Qi
of
Xianqing
Su Li,
interrupted Su
the
Li
mirror
and
spirit
said
since for a
gloomily,
while,
people
and
of Ghost
confirmed
Clan
that the
pay
hidden
attention to
crisis had
single-mindedness.
Then it
Since
slowly
I have
closed its
recognized
eyes
you as my
and fell
disciple,
asleep.
you
Because
have to
of
be
the
my
war in
disciple
ancient
for a
times,
lifetime.
its
You
injury
can't regret
was
it.
too serious.
Did Ghost Clan
If there were
have
no
such a
other
custom?
healing treasures,
Su Li was
it
speechless
could
for a
only
while
rely
and
on
didn't
a
know what
long
to say.
sleep to
She had
recover.
expected that if
The
she
sun
saw
rose
the matter
and the
of
moon
Ghost
set.
Sally,
In a
Qi
twinkling of an
Xianqing
eye,
would definitely
another
come
half a
her.
year passed.
But she didn't
in the
expect
world
that it
of
was
the
Qi
illusion of
Xianqing who had
reincarnation.
recovered his memory.
In this half a year,
Last, take this
the
thing.
situation in
Qi
the secular
Xianqing
world
turned his palm
had been
and took out a
completely
quaint
different.
black ring
In the
from
imperial
nowhere.
palace of Dahan
Su Li took it
country,
with doubt.
It was
and
cold
looked at it a
and
little.
silent. There was no
like the
pattern
peace
on the
after the
surface
storm.
of the ring.
The bright
texture was a
sunshine
little
shone
rough,
through the
like a
wooden
stone
door of the hall,
surface, bringing a trace of warmth to the cool hall. Ling Li,
Chapter
who stood in
310.
front of the golden throne,
This is
Su
looked
Li
as
was
cold as
horrified.
winter.
She reached
His
out
face
to
was
take
like
it
a
off,
deep,
but
cold
found that the
pool
ring
with
seemed
no
to
end
grow
in
out
sight.
of her flesh.
Dongfang
No matter
Wuxue
how hard she
shrank his
tried,
neck
she
and
couldn't pull
withdrew
it
his
off.
gaze.
Seeing
There was a
this
trace
scene,
of fear on his
Qi
face,
Xianqing suddenly
although he just
smiled
sent
with
his
a sense
father
of
to
relief
help
on
on
his
himself.
face,
Not
as if
for
he had
anything
completed
else.
a very
It turned out that
important
his
mission.
mother had already been
My
killed
apprentice,
by this
stop.
traitor.
As long
No
as you
wonder
put this
that he
ring
can
on,
no longer
there is
receive
no
any
reason to take
news
it
about
off.
his mother.
Really?
In the past
Su
2
Li looked
years.
up, and her
It was
eyes
not
were
that his
cold.
mother didn't love
She cut
him,
her ring
but the
finger like a
only
knife
person who cared
without
about him in the
hesitation.
world had
Qi
disappeared.
Xianqing didn't
Thinking
stop her
of this,
and let Su
a
Li
touch
do
of
it.
coldness
At the moment when the
appeared
sharp
on his
finger
immature
wind broke the
face.
surface
He
skin
looked at the
of
civil
ring
and
finger.
military
Su
officials
Li's movement
kneeling below
suddenly
the hall with
stagnated.
hatred.
She
His mother's
forcibly
death
must have
withdrew
something
the
to
force
do with
behind.
these people. And her
Among the
expression
officials,
was
the
completely
most shocked
gloomy.
one was
in her
Mrs.
eyes. The
She
black
stared
lotus
blankly
ring
at her
on the ring
grandson,
finger,
who stood
suddenly
tall and
disappeared,
straight in front
and
of
then
the
appeared
golden
on the other
throne,
four fingers,
like a dragon.
After
among
flashing
them.
several
Was this
times.
really her
It
third
was
grandson?
fixed on a little
When she
finger.
received the news last
This
night,
thing has been
she thought it would be a
integrated
game
into
with
your body.
Dongfang Shao,
and its position
is
not fixed.
But she didn't expect that
Even
when
if
she
you
cut
cut
off
off
10
10
fingers,
she saw
is
all
also
the
officials
useless,
kneeling on the ground,
not to mention the ring
and
finger.
shouting at Dongfang
Qi Xianqing
Shao, who
said
was
proudly.
horrified.
Suli
Your
was
Majesty,
silent for a moment.
Please
Suddenly,
abdicate your
she
throne.
changed her previous
Your
anger
Majesty,
and smiled.
Please abdicate
Master,
your throne.
don't you know
Your Majesty,
the current situation
please
of your apprentice?
abdicate your throne.
In the end,
this ring will still return to your hands.
the third
Suli
grandson,
said and stared
who had
at
always
Qi
been
Xianqing's
ignorant
reaction.
and foppish,
But Qi
stood
Xianqing
in
just
front of
pulled out
Dongfang
an
Shao
unknown
like a
smile,
magic sword.
and then
He
his
looked
figure
down
disappeared
and was full
with
of
the
killing
wind,
intent.
leaving a sentence
Dongfang
echoing
Shao,
in her ears.
you are the emperor of
There's
country,
an old
but
ancestor
you are
in the
jealous
Ghost
of a
Valley,
talented
and I have helped you
perverse.
to get rid
You've
of him.
assassinated
It doesn't matter
3
how many
generations
people
of
you
my
kill
Ling
for the
family.
rest. My
As for those
grandfather,
human clan with
father,
life rings
and brother
I have sent
all
them
died in
to
your
the
hands.
spiritual realm.
With such a
I still
big
have
heart.
something to do.
How could you
When
be
the
the
time is
ruler of a
right,
country?
I will meet you
Dongfang
again.
Wuxue.
Su
Yes.
Li's eyes flashed.
Dongfang Wuxue.
And she looked up at the
who had
direction
always been
where
harmless
Qi
in front of
Xianqing
many princes.
disappeared.
Was
There
like
was
a
an
cub
old
at this
ancestor
moment,
in the Ghost Valley,
showing his sharp
Then why
claws
didn't he
and
have
teeth.
any reaction?
Although you are
when
my
she attacked
father,
the Ghost Valley?
you kill my
If the
mother.
old ancestor
You deserve
was
to
an
die.
ancient person,
After saying
Qi
that,
Xianqing,
he raised the sword
why
in his
can you
hand
fight in the
and
mirror
fiercely
without
chopped
being
at
hurt?
Dongfang
Is it
Shao,
the
whose
town
cultivation
of the
had been
Ghost
sealed.
Thinking
A
of
big
this,
head
Su Li
rolled from the
frowned.
chair to Mata,
A ghost clan
who
that
was
could
trembling
move
all
freely.
over. She raised her
Dongfang
hand
Wuxue's
and looked at the
face was
ordinary
still
black
full of
lotus
disbelief
ring
on the little
He would
finger.
never expect
After a
that
moment
he
of
was
silence,
killed by his own son.
She suddenly
At the same time,
breathed a
he was
sigh of
deeply
relief,
confused,
and her eyes
Why
were
didn't the
burning.
big backer
No matter
of the
how many
Dongfang
variables
family
there were,
send
her
any
plan
message
would
when they
continue
were in crisis,
and no one could
in the
stop it.
palace.
At lunchtime,
Many officials held
Su Li
their
didn't
breath
see
for
Ling
fear
come to eat.
of
She went
disturbing
in
the
the study,
voice that was
but
facing
didn't
away
see
from
him.
them.
When she
Until
was
Mrs.
wondering,
Gu couldn't
Chu
help but
Lu
step
made
forward
clothes
excitedly
came in.
and murmured.
After seeing
Su
Ling
Li's
Li's
body
Chu
shook
Lu
slightly.
quickly saluted.
He came to his
Young
sense
madam.
from the days
Although her real
and restrained
identity
his
was
emotions.
Ling,
She
Qingluan's
turned around
sister,
and walked down
for
the
the sake
golden
of
high
safety.
platform.
She
In
hid
a
her
more
identity
frightened
as a
atmosphere
maid
than
in
the
the Ling
officials.
mansion.
He helped
Naturally,
Mrs. Gu
she had to
sit
abide
down
by the
slowly.
rules.
He
Su Li
forced a
nodded
smile on
gently
his
and
face.
asked, "Grandma,
Where did they go?"
In addition to Dongfang Shao,
The
other people in
servant
the
doesn't know.
Dongfang family
Chu
who
Sure
participated in
hesitated
the attack
and
have
answered.
been killed. She did
After I
accidentally
deal with the
hear the
chores,
whereabouts of
I will go
Ling
back with
Li
you
and
and
offer
others.
Dongfang
But
Zhao's
Brother
head to my
Qingluan
grandfather
told her
not to tell Su
Great.
Li. Mrs.
Su
Gu
Li
was so
narrowed her
excited
eyes
that she
and
couldn't
sat in a
control
position
herself.
where Ling Li
She
usually
blushed
dealt with
and said,
chores.
"My good
She said,
grandson,
Chu
I didn't
Lu,
expect that you have been
don't you
hiding
think
for
too
so many
highly of
years.
yourself to lie in
We were
front of
all
me."
kept in the dark by
Chu
you."
Lu's identity
Ling Li
was
only bowed
suddenly
his head and
exposed.
said,
She stepped
"I'm
back
sorry
in
to make you
horror and
scared.
panicked.
Please
You-
forgive me, Grandma."
Who are you?
Forgive
It doesn't
me?
matter who I
What did
am.
I do? Su Li smiled
Gu
faintly
stared at Ling
and said,
Li
with her
The
old
important
eyes,
thing is
the
the
more she looked
whereabouts
at
of
him,
Ling
the
Li
prouder she
and
became.
others.
She
Tell
raised
me,
her head
Ling
and said in
Qingluan
a
asked you to
sonorous
hide it
voice, because
if
he
you
was
didn't
worried that I would
endure
act
humiliation.
rashly. How
Now
could
it's
you
been so
destroy
long.
the old
Why don't
enemy
you tell
of the
me?
Ling family?
Chu Lu
If we
bit her
really knew
lower
your
lip
details in
and
advance,
struggled in her heart.
It was not difficult
Finally,
to disguise.
she was
for a
frightened
while.
by Su
But after a
Li's
long
exposure
time,
of her identity.
the old fox
She changed her
Dongfang,
mind.
Shao,
She knelt down
would
and
definitely
told
see
everything
the
she
clues.
knew.
Speaking
Master
of this,
and
Mrs.
others have
Gu
been away
glanced
for
at the
more than
head
2 hours.
under Mata's feet.
I heard that they're going
She
to
looked very
newly
happy.
open brothel
When she
in
looked back
Yunjing
to
City
Ling Li's
called
face,
Sweet Alley.
her pride
Young
and
madam,
relief
please
finally
keep it a secret
turned
from
into
me.
heartache.
I just want to stay with
The
my
disguise
brother
for more
and
than
live a
10
peaceful
years
life.
is not a joke.
I don't want.
I hate you
Chu
for
Lu
not
said,
living up to
and
expectations.
suddenly
Suddenly felt
these
something
years.
wrong. You
She
suffered
looked
at
up
home
and saw that
but
the
you could
chair
bear
behind
it
the table
and
was
develop
empty.
your powers.
There was no one
secretly.
there. How
Young
hard
madam
was it?
left. It's me
When
who
did she
should
leave?
say sorry. Chu Lu was confused and immediately frightened.
Wasn't
Looking at the
Su Li
old man
always in the
crying in
acquired
front of
eighth
him,
hurdle?
Ling
Why didn't
Li was
she,
silent. Who was in
and
the
a sense
acquired
of
relaxation
relaxation
find
rose
out
in his
how
heart
Su Li left.
as if the pain and
Is she not
tiredness
Su
of
Li?
the past 10
Then
years
who
were
is she?
nothing.
Chu
But at
Lu
the
sat on
same
the ground
time,
blankly.
he was more
and
relieved.
thought about it for a while.
The resentment was
at this
finally
moment
over.
in the sweet alley.
Next, he could
in
go
the
to find
spacious
Su Li
and bright lobby.
Brotherly, it's
The
great.
vermilion
I
decoration
didn't expect that you were
made the
so
ground
promising.
more bright.
Kneeling
In the center
behind
of the
Prime
round
Minister
carpet
Tang,
in the middle of the
suddenly
lobby,
stood up
Ling Li
and
stood
walked
silently and
He
looked
danced
cold.
and said,
Dozens of
I
women
didn't
in
expect that
different
you were
clothes
so powerful.
lay on the edge.
I don't like
of the carpet.
Dongfang Shao.
Looking at the
for a
position
long
where they
time.
fell,
They
Prime
were
Minister
all
Tang
knocked out
was a
by
little
Ling
frightened
Li before
and
they
wanted to stand up
approached.
to pull back the
Amaze?
sugar.
But he
Ling
saw
Li
Ling
looked
Li
around
smiled
and saw that the
patted
rooms
Tang
on the
Lei's
second
shoulder.
floor were
You were also
symmetrical,
good.
as if
I
they
am
were
much worse
carved
than
from
you.
the same mold.
Tang Lei laughed.
There were strange
Prime
patterns
Minister
on
Tang
both
was
sides
relieved
of the stairs,
and shook his head
Some of them
and
were
sighed.
very familiar.
Could it be that
he
this
immediately
was
realized
fortune
that he
favors
broke
fools?
into a
After
tactical
cooperating
matrix.
with the Yinma
No
call,
wonder Ling
he naturally
Qingluan,
saw the true
Ling
face
Mo
of child
and others disappear.
But in order not to
Right
frighten
at this
his
moment,
grandson,
an
he didn't
extremely
reveal it to
enchanting
Tang
voice
Lei.
came
After
from
a
all
while,
directions.
an imperial
imperial edict was taken out.
You deserve
The
to be a
successor of the
famous
emperor
figure in the
was
martial
Dong
arts circle.
Wuxue.
I really
The
admire
Dahan
your
country
temperament
was
and
still the
determination.
Dahan country,
But
should I call you
the fate
hierarch
of changing
or
its name?
third?
But everyone knew
master
that the country
before the voice
was
died
no
away.
longer the surname.
Ling
Ling suddenly
Dongfang.
became serious.
After a while,
without
in the
saying
Ling
anything,
Ling
he turned
Ping
around and
and
stabbed
stabbed
at
the
the second
who
floor
didn't go
with
to
his
the imperial
fingers.
court.
A wisp
Stared
of
at the young
wind
man who
turned
walked
into a
slowly
sword
with the
and
help of
pierced
Mrs.
through the
Gu.
door and
For a
window.
moment,
There was
they
a
didn't know
muffled
whether they
hum
were
in
in
the room,
reality
and the
or in a
charming
dream.
voice stopped
Li,
abruptly.
your leg.
Ling Li succeeded
At this
in one
moment,
strike.
Xiao
and he
Ming
didn't
couldn't
stop.
see anything except the tall
He
and
flew up
straight
and
young man
smashed
who
the
was much
wooden
taller
door.
than her.
As the
For the
sawdust
first time,
flew,
she
an
looked up at her
obscure
son.
figure
She
flashed
couldn't
away.
control the crystal
Although it was a
tears
glimpse,
anymore.
he still saw the
She threw
person's
herself
face
into Ling
clearly.
Li's arms.
It was the Lord
Mom,
of the Hahuan
Ling Li
sect,
sighed softly
Yi
and
Tian.
didn't say anything.
Ling Li didn't hit the
Everything
target
was
for
in
the second
silence.
time. He walked
Good boy.
back to the middle of the
Ling
lobby
Ping seemed to know
and
his third
stared
brother
at the
for the first
closed
time.
room upstairs.
With a flash of
He
inspiration
laughed
in his
loudly
mind.
and said,
Ling Li,
"Lord Yi,
who stood up,
why do you hide?
immediately
Is it because
associated
your
with the
appearance
image in his
doesn't
mind.
match your voice?"
He laughed.
"You know
and
that you
said,
can't be seen.
I've always found
so
it
you
strange.
Yi
The person who
Tian,
appeared
who was in
many
the dark,
times
was
and
so
secretly
gloomy.
saved me
But
from
after all,
danger.
she had
Although his
lived
figure
long
was
enough,
very similar,
so she didn't make a
was
sound.
completely different
Ling
from the
Li,
one I saw
the
before.
third child of the
So
Ling
was you.
mansion,
Ling
was
Li
only
smiled
18
slightly
or 19
and
years
said in a
old.
low voice,
His cultivation
Dongfang
was
Shao
even
took
higher
away
than
my
hers,
father
and
She had been pursuing the longevity realm
After I
for a
mastered some
lifetime.
power,
Although
but
I
Ling
can't
Li
confront
reached
with
it
him,
in
I
less
won't
than
let
20
him get what he
years.
wanted again.
How could she bear it?
When Ling
No
Ping
wonder.
heard it,
No
his heart
wonder that at
suddenly
such a
sank.
young age,
Then he
could
thought of
not only
something,
control
and his
the Ema
expression
cult,
changed
but also
greatly.
subdue the Tianji
Grandma
country
went to
and
the
destroy
imperial
many
court today.
forces.
This time,
before he
it was
finished
her
his
Hawan
words,
sect.
Mrs. Gu
turned.
suddenly threw a package
The
into his
madness in
arms
Yi
and said,
Tian's eyes
"Ping,
became more
look at
intense.
this."
The
Then,
charming voice
as
returned
Ling
to
Li
normal.
said,
It was
Dongfang
even
Zhao's
harsher
head
than
was
the owl.
used as a
Even Ling
sacrifice to the
Qinglong
deceased
and
relatives
others
of the
who were
Ling
some
family.
distance away.
Everything
felt
went
a tingling
smoothly,
in their
but
eardrums
Xiaoming
when
always
they heard
felt
it.
that Ling
Li,
was not happy.
don't be complacent. If you want to destroy my Hawan
Instead,
sect,
his
your
thoughts
Ema
became
cult
more and
is
more
not
complicated.
qualified. Is it
I like
because
to
of
see
her?
how you will behave
A
in
beautiful
front of it.
face of a woman
When Ling
appeared
Mo
in
and
Xiaoming's
Ling
mind.
Qinglong heard
She couldn't
the
help
voice.
but be
Their
lost
faces
in thought.
changed at the same
More than
time.
a year had
They
passed
shouted,
consciously.
"Break the tactical
Lee still
matrix.
didn't forget her.
Attack that direction.
Since Lee had been
with all
pretending
your
to be a
strength.
playboy before.
Break the
How could
tactical
he
matrix.
choose a man by his appearance?
All the followers of the
Was he
Ema
really in
cult
love
heard
with
the
Su Li?
order
Su
and
Li,
immediately
where'd she go?
began to break the
Thinking of
tactical
this,
matrix
Xiaoming
in the direction
sighed
of Ling
deeply.
Li.
Lord
But the
Rui
progress was
too
also
slow.
crazy to
It
find
would take
her.
at least
But there
1
was no
hour
news
to
in
break
the
the
past
tactical
1.5
matrix.
years.
I
It
didn't
seemed
expect
that
the
the
Hawan
Hawan
sect
sect
has such a
Mom,
high level in
when she was
tactical
thinking,
matrix
Ling
besides
Li's
poison.
voice suddenly
I should have
came.
taken a tactical
She looked up
matrix
and saw
elder
Ling
with me.
Li standing at
Ling
the door
Qinglong's
calmly,
face
with a
was
little
slightly
impatience.
pale.
Ling
Come in and
Mo
talk.
shook his
As
head
usual,
and waved the
Ling
sword
Li
in his
walked into the
hand
room
to
to
stab the
close
same
door.
place.
This made
tactical
Xiaoming
matrix.
slightly
He said,
absent-minded.
when we came,
She vaguely
we had
remembered that the
killed
last time
80%
Ling
of the
did
disciples
this was
of the
also
Hawan
for
sect.
Su Li.
But the Lord
We just
has
wanted to
not
ask
reached
how to
the
please a
longevity
girl.
realm.
This time,
I believe
there
in
was
the
no
master.
exception. Maybe when we go
Mother,
out, keep
the
this
master
talisman.
has finished.
Ling Li didn't say
Ling
much and
Qinglong
gave a black
also joined the
diamond-shaped
team
token
to break the
Xiaoming.
tactical matrix.
In her puzzled
He
eyes,
sighed.
he
I
said,
hope so.
"This is a
When Ling
protective
Mo
token.
and others
It can
tried
resist
their best
any
to
form of
break the
attack
tactical matrix.
below the
The
longevity
scenery
realm.
around Ling
At the same
Li
time,
changed greatly.
it is also a token
The
for good
original
orders.
magnificent
With it,
lobby
you can also
disappeared
mobilize
and was
part of the
replaced
power
by a
of the Ema
barren
cult.
underground plane.
Ema cult.
It was a dark pit
Xiaoming's
under
pupils
his feet.
shrank suddenly.
A long ladder
Even a woman
extended
like her
down
who had never
and almost
really stepped
swallowed
into the
people.
cultivation world.
Ling Li frowned.
She still
Just
felt
now,
frightened
Yi
when she
Tian
heard
rushed
the
into the
three
pit at
words
the
risk
risk
of
of
being
being
hit
hit
by
by
him.
The
Could it be that what she
supreme
said
cult
lurking
now
in the
was
Dahan
not
country?
alarmist talk.
You can even
and there
mobilize
was
the
really
power
a
of the Ema
horrible
cult.
existence in it.
Speaking of this, Xiaoming suddenly
We're
thought
already
of something
here.
and trembled.
Could it be that we're going to give up
Hierarch.
halfway?
Hierarch
and
of the
return
Ema
home?
cult is
Thinking
called
of this,
Child Li. Ling Li
is it-
smiled and stepped into the pit. His figure was slowly swallowed by the darkness and disappeared. Chapter 3:18.
drip.
The
Hearing
sound
Ling
of
Mo's
falling
words
water,
echoed in
Xiaoming
the
was
quiet
stunned.
cave.
If it was
Ling
in the
Li
past,
walked
she would
no
never
less than
believe
a
this kind of
thousand
words.
steps.
She
At
would
this
even
moment,
reprimand Ling
the stone
Li for
ladder under
boasting
his feet
and
was
causing
no
trouble.
longer dry.
But when she
He was
remembered
stained
that
with
he
a
came
sticky
back
substance.
with the head of Dongfang
There was an
unpleasant
Shao,
smell in the
destroyed
air.
the powerful
Ordinary people might
Dongfang
vomit
family
as long
and
as they
secretly
smelled it.
protected the
I have
Ling
never
family
smelled such
for
a
several
smell.
years.
Ling Li covered
She had
his
to
nose and
believe
mouth. Such
he kept moving
extraordinary
forward
means.
nervously.
Ling
After
Li,
a long time,
her son,
there was a
was the
light green
hierarch
light
of the
in the
Ema
depths
cult,
of the dark
the
cave.
supreme cult.
Exit.
Looking
Ling
at the
Li was
sparkling
refreshed.
light in his
He
mother's
sped up
eyes.
slightly.
When he
Ling
reached
Li
the edge
knew
of the
that she
cave,
had believed it.
he suddenly stopped.
After a moment of silence,
There was a person
he
in the
continued.
open space
Mother,
in front of him. Ling
to be
Qinglong
exact,
will deal
it
with
was
the
a mummy.
affairs of the royal
He approached
family of the
cautiously
Han dynasty.
and suddenly realized
something.
Are you
He
going to
looked at
find
the
Su
mummy,
Li?
and then his pupil
Xiaoming
shrank.
suddenly interrupted
Yi
him.
Tian,
And
the
her
Lord of the
expression
Hawan
became
sect,
left, who had
Hearing
just
Xiao
entered the
Ming's
cave
words,
alive, died.
Ling Li was
His
slightly
blood was
stunned.
sucked dry.
Xiao Ming
and he
shook
didn't
her
hear
head and
any
sighed.
movement. You were
In the
born in my
silence,
womb for
the
10
silent
months.
horror was
Even if you
spreading.
try to restrain
Ling Li
yourself
suddenly
in the
felt
past
numb.
year,
The situation
still
was
see that you
completely
can't forget
beyond
her.
his imagination.
Ling Li was
He
slightly
thought
shocked.
that it
Then
that
he took a
Tian
deep
mentioned
breath
was the
and
old
bowed to
ancestor
Xiao
of the
Ming.
Hawan sect.
I don't believe
Now
that Li
Yi Tian
will
was
leave
dead.
me.
It was
for
very
no
likely
reason.
that it
If I don't
hiss,
figure out
which little
even
guys
if I
outside,
died,
I
don't
want
you
to
come
die
in
peace.
and chat with me.
Therefore,
A
I
charming
will have to
voice
trouble
like
you and
sweet
second
honey
brother
suddenly
to
came
continue
from Ling
working
Li's
hard for
mind.
this family.
It shocked him
Before
and
Ling
made him
Li
dizzy.
finish his words.
He walked
Xiao Ming had
uncontrollably
already
to
blocked
the
his
cave.
mouth in a panic
At the
of
critical
blame.
moment, you
Ling
are
Li
such an
bit the tip of
unlucky
his tongue.
child. The
I'm
strong
still
pain
young.
mixed with
The
the
smell of
sides,
blood
the
broke
biggest
out in his
obstacle has been
mouth.
eliminated by
Under
you.
such stimulation,
You're the biggest
he
project of the
regained
family.
control of
It's
his
nothing
body.
for me to solve some trifles for you.
Go to find her with peace of mind.
Chapter 3.
Speaking of this,
Xiao Meng
what a
smiled
handsome
softly.
child. I'm tempted.
I'm still waiting for my
the
grandson.
seductive voice
Thank
seemed
you,
to
mother.
be able to bewitch people.
Langley looked more
Langley
relaxed.
looked tense.
I will come back
and
to see you
forcibly
within
suppressed
3
his heart,
years, which was
Please don't
aroused
worry
by the
about
tone.
me. He
I will
stared
set
at
off
the
now.
graceful figure
Then
that
he
suddenly
bowed
appeared in
deeply
front
again,
of him. Under the
and
pale
turned out of
green
the door
light.
without
A familiar
hesitation.
but strange
He rode the spirit
face
horse
came
that
into
had been
view.
prepared.
You
and went
are.
away.
He
Langley
didn't want to
thought
wait
of the
for a
owner
moment.
of this face and
Xiao
looked
Meng,
slightly serious.
who followed him all the way to the
Zipe
gate,
watched her
the face
son
of the
go
woman
away.
in front of him,
The tenderness
was exactly
on her
the
face
same
immediately
as that of Su
turned into
Zipe,
bitterness,
who had been reduced.
She
to a
turned back
slave.
to the room.
Was it a
and sat in
coincidence
silence for a
or
moment.
Then she
Su
sat in
Zipe,
front of the dressing
I
table.
have some impression
and
of you.
opened the top drawer.
The woman
of the small
tilted her
cabinet.
head in confusion.
She took out
and
rolls
touched
of
her cheek with her
portraits,
nails.
one after another.
Then Langley saw
These
that
are
her
the
nails
best
were
girls
more
in
than
the
an
capital
inch
city.
long, and
Except for their
glowed
different
with
looks,
unusual
they're not
metallic
as good
luster.
as Su.
Could these nails belong to human beings?
Why do you have to
Langley
be so
felt cold.
stubborn?
Xiao Meng
Suzy
sighed
suddenly
with
laughed
tears
out.
in her eyes.
I remember. She was
The
selfish
Suzy
after
Pei
all.
you're talking
After
about
Su Li
isn't it the
disappeared
blood
for 3
food that I ate a
months,
few days ago?
she found no
A
trace
human
of
girl
her.
of 17
Then,
or
she
18
secretly
years
chose a
old
new
is
wife
really
for
delicious.
However,
Eating
on
human
the one
beings?
hand, Suzy
Ling
Pei's
Li's
reputation was
Ling
so
Li's
bad
pupils
that no
shrank,
girls wanted to marry
and he
him.
subconsciously
On the other
stepped
hand,
back a few
she saw the
steps.
persistence in her
Suddenly,
son's eyes.
there was nothing
so
under
she
his
didn't
feet.
dare to show it.
When he was about to step back to the stone path, Suzy Pei
Langley had
suddenly
always
rushed
been a
to
man
him
of his
at a
word.
very fast
If she
speed,
really
like
forced
a
him
ghost
to marry
with a twisted
again,
smile
it would almost
on her
have the
face.
opposite effect.
Her hands were about
When
to
she was
touch
hesitating,
Li's chest.
Ling Li's hidden
Go away.
identity.
Ling Li's
eyes
eyes
were
were
sharp,
which
and he
shocked the
slapped
world.
Suzy
He became
Pei
the
in
object
air.
of love
Suzy
for
Pei
countless girls.
took the slap,
But she had
and
seen
continued to rush
Li's
to him
determination
as if
today.
nothing had happened.
These portraits,
Helplessly
thinking of
Ling
this,
Li simply
she
rushed
threw
back
all the
and
portraits
fell
in
into
the
the
brazier
pit
like a meteor.
Suddenly, there was
Crack,
a big
crack,
fire
crack.
in the brazier
At the bottom of
which
the
made
pit,
the light
the white
and shadows
bones
piled
piled
up like a
Meng's
mountain.
face flicker.
Ling Li's
Ling Li
figure
got rid of
sank
the
into
burden
bone
of
mountain
the
like a
Ling family.
meteor.
And
He went out of
crushed a
mansion
large
and
number of
rushed for
bones.
7 days
For time,
and 7 nights.
the sound was
without
continuous
eating or drinking.
After a while,
Finally,
Ling
he
Li,
arrived at the
whose
Qinghe
clothes were a
province.
little damaged.
He had monitored the
appeared
mansions
from
of the
the
Su
bones.
family
He
and the
gasped
Dongfang
slightly
Rui family
and
for
ran the
more than a year,
Qinggong method
but he got
to
float
nothing.
on the
The
surface
Ling Li
of
building
the
in
fragile
Yunjing
bone
City
He
had been
glanced
closed
at the
half a
sea of
year
white
ago.
bones in
Now,
a vast
the
cave.
only clue he
and a
could
hint
find
of horror
was
the
flashed in
Ling
his
Li
eyes.
building in the
There were
Qinghe
so many
province.
bones.
One
There
and
were
a
no
half
less
years
than
ago,
100,000.
after Mr. Li
Were these
appeared to
people
save him.
bloody food
Su Li
of the
disappeared
mysterious woman
almost at the
just
same
now?
time. What exactly
Moreover,
was it?
The
Ling Li
Ling Li
didn't have
building
time
in
to think too
Yunjing
much.
City also
Suddenly,
closed a few days
there was a
later.
slight sound
couldn't
of
be a
breaking the
coincidence
air
that
behind
the time was
He
so
hurriedly
tight.
turned back
When
and
dealing with
raised
the
his sword
Dongfang
block.
family,
Ding. He went to the Ling
the
Li
sound of
building
gold
to
and
see
iron
Mr.
was
Li
almost
more than
ear-piercing.
But he
A
was refused
terrifying
by the
force
reason
hit
that
the
Mr.
sword.
Li traveled
Almost
around.
instantly,
He even didn't
the
see
inherited
any
sword
sword
of the
of the
Yinma
Ling Li
cult
building.
in Ling Li's
So,
hand was
he was
broken
more
into several
suspicious
pieces,
and had the
his
idea
body
of exploring the
backward
Ling Li
like a
building
cannonball
in the Qinghe
and hit the
province.
hard mountain
Good
wall with a
osmanthus
bang.
wine. He
Come
spat
in
out a
and have a
mouthful of
taste.
blood.
The
What kind of
Liaohua
liquor
was this?
is the real product of the
What
northern
fresh
country.
blood food?
It's a pity
Suzy
not to
Pei
drink it.
rushed to the
Ling Li,
blood-stained
who had
mountain
disguised
wall
himself
like a
just
madman
entered the
and
Ling
stuck
Li
out his
building.
tongue to lick
His
it.
ears were filled with shouts.
When
He
Ling Li
glanced
saw
around
this scene,
and found that
he felt
nearly
disgusted
80%
and
of the
almost
people in the
vomited
lobby
blood.
on the first
He
floor
barely
were
stood
seated.
up.
He
Most
didn't
of them
care
were
that this
people in the
movement
martial
would
arts circle.
aggravate his injury.
In the Qinghe
He
province,
stared at the hole in the mountain
Ling Li
wall
building had
and
replaced
burst
the
out
Tainik
fastest
attic
speed
and became the
His figure
favorite
flew
gathering
out
place
like a
of
shadow
people
in the martial
Run.
arts circle. He had to escape.
Ling Li found a table.
He wasn't a
and
match
sat
for this
down.
monster.
After a while,
Stubbornly
the
resisting
waiter
would
came to
only
him.
result in
After
his
ordering
death.
a pot of
He was
osmanthus
fast,
wine,
but
he
looked around
casually.
faster.
He
She
saw
appeared
many
in front of
ordinary
Ling Li in a
drinkers
flash
and warriors
and slapped
drinking
Ling
together.
Li into the
It
ground
was quite
again with a
strange
sneer.
and harmonious.
Boom. The ground
However,
exploded
when he saw
and
the
a
wooden
human-shaped
sign
hole
hanging
appeared.
not far from
This
the
time,
entrance of the lobby.
it took Ling Li
which
15
said,
minutes.
"Those who
to climb
disturb
out
will
of
be
the sea of
killed
bones."
without mercy."
He breathed heavily
suddenly
and
understood.
was stained with
With
blood.
the ability
His
of the
eyes
Ling
were
Li
full
building,
of
the Yinma
unwillingness.
cult couldn't be the
Could it be that he
king
was
of the
really
going to
world.
die here, not
For
to
no
mention
reason?
frightening
Child,
rascals.
how can you leave
As
me?
for
Langley
Mr.
felt a
Lee,
weight on
although
his
he had been in
shoulder,
contact with him
and the
for several
seductive
years,
voice
he still
suddenly
couldn't figure
sounded
out what
in
he
his
was
ear.
thinking
He sensed
and what
that
was the
Susie
meaning
Pay
of everything
breathed
he
out,
did, and immediately
"Sir,
got goosebumps
here is your
on his neck.
osmanthus wine."
The soft
Please
body
enjoy
of
it
Susie
slowly.
Pay climbed to
The waiter brought a
Langley's
clear
chest
and
transparent
this time,
golden pot.
Langley was
and left.
seriously injured.
Langley
and
glanced
had
at
no
him
strength
and didn't
to
ask
avoid
much.
it.
Looking at Susie Pay at such a close
He also knew the
distance,
operating mode
Langley
of the
saw
Langley
that her
building.
pupils were
These waiters
vertical,
were trained
which
by the
reminded
Langley
him of a
building
terrible
itself,
creature
instead of being
instantly.
hired casually.
Susie Pay,
if he
looked
rashly
at Langley
inquired
with her
it would
bright
only
green
alert
eyes.
the enemy. Her eyes
familiar
were full of
taste
excitement
rolled into his
and
throat.
fascination.
Ling Li's
Her long
eyes
nails
darkened,
scratched
and his
Ling
psychic
Li's
awareness
face,
spread
and then
quietly.
she gently leaned
Although it
on
was
his
only a
chest,
short period
listening
of more
to the
than a year.
powerful heartbeat.
With the help of the
She
elixir
sighed
of
with satisfaction.
mystery,
Its
his
really a
cultivation
perfect
had been
blood food.
improving.
You're
at an
not only
extremely
beautiful,
terrifying,
but also
speed.
so pure.
Now he had
and
reached the
delicious.
fifth hurdle.
I really don't want to eat
longevity
you.
Life.
His cultivation
Pei
was not inferior
and
to
suddenly
that of the
exerted
snake
force.
demon at that time.
Ling Li
Therefore,
groaned,
and
under
a
the
piece
cover
of
of
flesh
such a
was
high
dug out.
realm of psychic
Susie
awareness.
Pei
No
ate
one
it
in the
and licked the
entire
blood on her nails.
Ling Li building noticed.
Susie Pei
even
didn't
Fong
forget
Mu,
to eat it.
who was
Disgusting.
stationed here,
Get
didn't
away.
find anything.
Ling Li's forehead was
No.
full of cold
Ling Li
sweat because of the
frowned
pain.
when the psychic
He was
awareness
powerless
came back
to
to him.
push away
Although
the
the attic on the
increasingly
top
heavy
floor
body
of the Ling Li
of
building was
Susie
clean,
Pei.
it was
You
very
are not a
deserted.
human being.
No one had lived
Is
there.
there
for
really
many
a
years.
monster in the world?
Could it be that those
The bright
people
smile
of
on the
Ling Li
face of
building
Susie
didn't like
Pei
him?
Did
Suddenly
Mr. Li
froze.
really travel around?
She became furious.
Or did Mr. Li
and
have another
scratched
place?
5 bloody marks
After drinking
on
a cup
Ling
of
Li's
wine?
chest? Ling Li
Monster.
suppressed the
How could I be a
irritation
monster?
in his heart.
I'm a god.
If he couldn't
I
find
am the
Mr.
most
Li,
ancient
he
snake
couldn't
god
find
in the
Su
world.
Li.
If I didn't
This was a
believe
dead
in
knot.
your human clan,
The young man in
how
white
could I
at the
be
peak of
trapped
the
in this
inborn
remote
realm on the
place?
3rd floor?
I can't
is
even find a
probably
decent blood
protector.
food.
Thinking
How
of
could I
this,
rely on
Ling Li threw a
devouring
piece of
the
silver
lowly
and turned
human
away.
clan
After
to maintain
nightfall,
my life?
Fong Mu finished his
Unforgivable.
practice for a day.
Boom. He shook
The
his head
boundless
and
and
helplessly
horrible
left
momentum
the
burst
Ling
out.
Li building.
Ling Li
The nimbus
and
in the
bones
city
under
is
him were
heterogeneous.
instantly thrown.
It's not
far
good for my
away.
practice.
The
to stay
strong
here.
force hit
Fortunately,
Ling Li's
I only need to stay one
seriously
day a
in your
month.
body.
I don't know
He
when I
suddenly
can blacked
break
out through the
and
lost
longevity
consciousness.
If I
At
can
the same
succeed,
time, I don't have to
Su
continue
Li,
to
who
breathe.
had just
the dirty
arrived
air.
at the sweet alley,
Fong Mu sighed
changed her
secretly.
expression.
After
She
Fong
punched the
Yuan
ground
without
took charge of the
hesitation
Ling Li
and
building.
went underground.
He set many
After a
rules.
long time,
Even
the
Fong
movement
Yuan
in the
had to
underground
strictly abide by
cave
them. Finally
Otherwise,
subsided.
he would be punished.
His behavior
Susie
immediately
Pei stood in the
made
center of the
Ling Li,
extremely clean,
who was in the dark,
circular open
give up the
space
idea
with
of
disheveled
capturing
hair.
him,
Suddenly,
interrogating him.
She came to
Then he
herself
quietly
and said,
followed Fong
blood
Yuan
food.
like a ghost.
Where's my blood food?
Following Fong Mu
She
out of
immediately
the city,
rushed into
Ling
the
Li was
bones,
more and
and
more
countless
shocked.
bones were
At
blasted
last,
into powder.
he saw Fong Mu
Within a
enter
few
the valley
breaths,
that he missed so
she
much.
found Ling Li,
He
who
was
had fainted.
stunned.
Here,
Sensing the
was
vitality
Su Li's
in
yard in the
Ling
valley.
Li's body,
Could it be
Susie
that
Pei
Su Li was
breathed a
here?
sigh of relief.
Yes. There were
and
only a
said,
few places where
"Fortunately,
Su
he
Li
is
was
still
used to
alive.
hiding.
How
Otherwise,
could he forget this
he will not
place?
be fresh.
This was the place
Then
where she
and
tore
Su
Ling
Li
Li's
spent
clothes very
several
quickly.
months.
Soon,
Ling Li couldn't help
was naked.
breathing heavily.
But just
You have
after
such
he
a good
took a
figure.
step,
I can
two
only enjoy it
rainbow
once.
lights
I
suddenly
am really
flashed
reluctant.
in front of him.
The green
The cold,
pupils
killing
of Susie
intent
Pei
in the rainbow
gradually
lights
turned
made him
pink.
slightly shocked.
At the same
He
time,
immediately
she
raised
slightly
his sword
opened
to
her
block.
mouth and spat
Plan.
out a pink
How
air
amazing
mass.
was the
As soon
fight
as the air
between
mass
two people
touched
in the
Ling
longevity
Li's
realm.
skin,
The loud
it
sound of the
immediately
collision
penetrated
of
into his
weapons
body,
immediately
like a living
shocked
thing.
everyone.
Then,
in the
just for a
valley.
moment, a restless Numa slowly
Ling Li
emerged
looked
from Ling Li's
slightly
body.
serious,
seeing
but
the
he didn't
scene.
leave.
When he
Susie
saw
Pei
clearly the
smiled
face of the
charmingly
person who
and
attacked
said,
him,
"Let
he
me
couldn't
serve
help
you
but
well."
frown.
Just when
The
her
person
red
was
lips were about
slovenly
to touch
and
Ling
drunk.
Li's face,
He had never seen
a
this person.
monstrous killing
Senior in the
intent,
fifth
like
realm
a mountain
of the
torrent,
longevity
suddenly
realm.
broke out.
Thank you for
behind
your
her.
mercy. Susie
The
Pei.
drinker's eyes
This
were
expression,
burning, and there was a
suddenly
rising
changed.
fighting
Before she
intent
could
in his
respond,
eyes.
a white
He
palm
said,
had been printed on her back.
"I'm Yu Wu Hai."
And then the second
Boom.
head of the
A
spiritual
blast
realm.
10 times
May I know your
more
name?
terrible than before.
The spiritual
broke out.
realm?
Susie
Ling Li was
Pei
shocked. Was like an ant
The
blown
Embark
away
cult
by a
came
seal.
from the spiritual
In the
circle.
blink of an eye,
The name of the
she was hit
spiritual realm
dozens of
was
feet
well
away
known.
and
Of
crashed
course,
into the
he had
hard
heard of it.
mountain rock. The person in
leaving
front of
a
him
human-shaped
was the
hole
second
in the
head of the
fierce
spiritual
wind.
realm.
Su Li's
Although he
eyes
didn't
were
know
full
the
of
specific
killing
status.
She
His
floated
cultivation
over
of the
and
second
held Ling
or
Li,
third
who was in a
realm
coma,
longevity
with
realm
one hand
was
to
naturally
block the
very
remaining
high.
impact for
If
him.
the spiritual
Then she
realm
pointed at
was
Ling
willing to help
Li's
him
major
to
acupoints with her
explore
fingertips
the whereabouts
to seal
of
his
Su
pneuma
Li,
and
thinking
blood
of this,
to protect his
Ling Li
life.
gave up the
Suddenly,
idea.
Su
of
Li's
using
eyes
Su.
were fixed.
He clenched his
She
fists
saw a bloody
and
hole
said,
in Ling
"I've heard a
Li's
lot
chest.
about you." The extinguished
Ling
anger
Li.
in her
heart
Hearing
immediately
this,
boiled.
Yu Wuhai's
She
face
flashed,
suddenly
appeared in
changed
front
slightly.
of Susie
He was
Pei.
no longer interested.
Susie Pei,
He said coldly,
struggled out of
"Are
the
you
mountain
Ling Li?"
rock.
Ling
She
Li
only
was
felt a
surprised.
black shadow
It seemed that this person
flashed
knew him.
in front of her.
How could it be?
Then she felt a
It's
sharp
really
pain
you.
on her right face.
Go to hell.
She
Ling
was
Li
thrown
didn't deny
far
it.
away.
Yu
and
Wuhai's
fell
face
heavily
was
into the
instantly
sea of
full
bones.
of killing
After a
intent.
long time,
Regardless of the
she
gap
climbed
between
up
himself
and screamed
and Ling Li.
angrily.
He launched
Which family
his
are you
killing
from?
move
How
to
dare you
attack.
ruin my plan?
Ling Li's
Could it be that
pupils
you've
shrank.
forgotten
He
the
suddenly
ancient agreement?
distanced himself from him
Before she
and
finished
said,
her words,
"Your Excellency,
Su Li was expressionless.
I have never met you." She
Why did you
flashed
suddenly
and slapped
kill me?
Susie Pei.
Is there
again.
any misunderstanding?
Susie Pei.
Then
spat
I ask
blood,
you, are
and
you
her
the
sharp teeth
hierarch of the
fell out.
Ema cult?
What ancient
Yu
agreement?
Wuhai returned
You
to his
dared
original
to attack
place
Ling Li
and said again,
You are courting death.
Ling Li was stunned
While speaking,
and immediately
Su Li's
became
eyes
silent.
flashed with
Since he
killing
didn't
intent.
recognize the
Her
wrong
5
person,
fingers were like
and
claws
claws and
In
penetrated
the valley,
the chest
a cold
of
shout
Susie
suddenly
Pei.
came.
bringing out a large
heard
number of
and
internal
looked at
organs
unwillingly.
and snake scales.
Finally,
Susie
he restrained
Pei
his killing
spat out a
intent
lot of
and
blood
stood aside.
held Su
Langley
Lee's
was
arm in
nervous.
horror.
I
It seemed that
remember.
the person who just
You were
spoke
Su Lee,
had a
the
higher
sister of
status.
this bloody food.
That was great.
You're not
He
an
also wanted to
ancient
figure
person.
out why
No
the
wonder
people
go
of the
to hell.
spiritual realm hated him so much.
Su Lee's
but didn't
eyes were
attack him when he was
extremely
weak.
cold.
Not
She
long
exerted
after,
force in her hand.
a thin
and
figure
most
that
of
was
the
tall
internal
and straight
organs
like a
of
pine
Susie
tree
Pei
walked out
were
slowly
suddenly
from the
smashed.
darkness. He was
Wait,
enveloped in
if
mist,
you kill me,
causing
Langley
him
will
to be
also die.
indistinct.
Perceiving
And a faint,
Su
deathly
Lee's killing
stillness
intent
emanated from his
Susie
body.
Pei
It was
finally
as if there was
panicked and
nothing in the
screamed.
world
As
that
soon
was
as the words
worthy
came
of
out,
his nostalgia.
she suddenly felt
Langley
that the
felt the
movement
pneuma
of her
of his
chest was
cultivation
stagnant
and was puzzled.
and there was no
This
trend
person's
to
cultivation
continue.
was just the
She gasped
third
for a few
realm of
breaths
longevity.
and looked frightened.
Why did he make you
Horrible.
Wuhai surrender?
Lunatic.
With this
How can there
question,
be
the
such an
face of the
existence
person in the
like you
dark
in the
gradually
reincarnation
became
mirror?
clear. You are not an ancient practitioner, but your cultivation is higher than that of ancient practitioners.
Chapter
Su Lee
319. You talk
Although
too
the
much
face
nonsense.
of the young man in front of him
Detoxify
had
the
changed,
poison in
Langley
Lee's
recognized
body.
his identity at a
She just
glance.
noticed that Ling
He was
Lee's
Fan
state
Yuan,
was a little
whom he had
abnormal.
taught in the valley.
Besides,
she had
however,
never heard of
what
that kind of
surprised him
poison
was that
and
Fan
couldn't
Yuan,
detoxify it.
who was only at the peak
Otherwise,
of the acquired
she would
realm
not
at that
stop
time,
only
had the
because
cultivation of the
Susie Pei
third hurdle of the
S-words.
longevity realm.
Seeing that
in
Su
just
Lee cared about
3 or
Langley,
4 years.
Susie Pei
If he
was
hadn't
a
got the
little
help
calmer.
of
She carefully
Mr. Lee,
pulled
he might have
Su
fallen
Lee's
behind
hand
from
from
her
Fan
chest,
Yuan in cultivation,
revealing a
Langley
penetrating
was still
bloody
shocked
hole.
and doubtful.
She took a big breath.
Fan Yuan
and her flesh
slightly turned his
blood
face
and looked at
immediately
Wuhai.
squirmed.
He
In
raised
the
his
blink of an
eyebrows
eye,
like a sharp
the
sword.
bloody hole shrank,
Wuhai
and no
immediately
more
bowed
blood
his
flowed
head.
out.
He knew where
After
he was
finishing
wrong
this step,
and didn't argue.
Susie
You
Pei
come with me.
breathed a sigh
Ignoring
of
you,
relief
Wuhai
and laughed.
Fan Yuan
I know.
coldly glanced
The memory
at
of the
Ling
bloody
Lee's
food
slightly
tells
shocked
me that
look.
you are his wife.
He suppressed the
No wonder
waves
he
in
is
his
so
heart
angry
and said
but
in
it
a
is
calm
strange.
tone,
Before
"Why does the
Langley
child
answered,
have such a
he turned
beautiful
around
wife like
and
you?
walked into the valley.
Why is he still a virgin?"
Langley felt a little
Su Lee
strange,
frowned,
but he kept
"You wanna
walking.
die?" He would
Susie
not let
Pei
go of any
stepped
clue
back a
about
few
Su
steps
Lee and waved
even
her
if it was a
hand.
dangerous
No,
place
no.
in front of him.
Miss Lee,
On the way,
you were too angry.
Langley,
I just said a
who
few
looked
words.
dignified,
Besides,
suddenly
the
heard a
method of
surprised
detoxification
voice.
has
Its
something to
eldest
do with
brother
it.
Ling.
He followed the voice and saw a black-faced young man. Chapter
He was hay in those
312. Now,
The
he
bones
also
sea
had the
cave,
cultivation
which was like a
of the
gust of
inborn
wind.
realm.
The
Fell
others
into
were also
silence
in
at
the
this
middle
moment.
and late
Su Lee
stages of
withdrew
the
her
inborn realm.
fingertips from the
When did the
glabella
cultivation of the people
Susie
who
Pei.
followed
The
Su
latter
Lee become
immediately fell to
so
the ground.
Langley
and
was
foamed
shocked
at the mouth.
But now the
Soon,
valley was
there was no
obviously
sound.
controlled by
Then,
Fan Yuan.
with a bang,
If Fan
the
Yuan
body
didn't
of the
speak,
giant dark
he couldn't
green
ask other
snake
things.
appeared.
A
He could
member
only
of the
follow
demon race
Fan
who had
Yuan
lived for who knew how many
and
years
stopped in
had
front of
died,
a building, just like that.
This is
Su Lee
looking at the
frowned
old but
and felt that the
spotless
foundation
bamboo
in her wrist
building in front
was
of him.
reduced by
Langley
1,000.
suddenly froze.
This
and
battle
thought back
seemed
to 4
easy,
years ago.
but in fact,
it was
she
here
had
that Lee
burst
tried her
out the
best
greatest
to
combat
kill the
power,
two elders
so that
of
she
the
could
blood
seriously
refining hall.
injure the snake.
And she
demon.
took him to settle down.
Returning to Langley,
It took
who was
several
still
months
naked,
and
Su Lee
hundreds
knelt
of thousands
and
of
sat on
tails
the
of
side.
silver.
Her
to cure his
expression
poison.
was a little uncertain.
It was a pity that he couldn't
What she used
recognize
just
his
now
heart at that
was the
time.
secret method.
He didn't
from
know
memory,
that he heard her with the name
soul-searching
of
skill.
Ling Shui.
As the name suggested,
Lee is here.
This skill
Ling
could
Lee's
explore
throat
other
seemed to be
people's
blocked by
primordial
something.
spirit. And
After a
memory.
long time,
it was also
he spat out a
applicable
sentence
to the demon
and didn't take
However,
a step forward.
After using
Fan
it,
Yuan was
the
silent
person who
for
was
a
affected
moment
by it
and
would either
finally
die
said,
or become
"If you
stupid.
think so,
Susie
it's
Pei was
right."
obviously
Really?
unlucky.
Langley
and
was
died
shocked
directly
and immediately
Su Lee,
couldn't control
who got
his
her
temper.
memory.
He
He
stepped
stepped
up
up
to
to
the
the
bamboo
bamboo
building
building. It was
and
by
walked
Jean.
to the bamboo
She
door.
also
His
vaguely
hand was
understood
slightly
the trembling
trembling
as he pushed the
It
door
was probably
open.
because the
Fan
demon
Yuan
soul
stood
had been
downstairs
seriously
and
injured
looked at
a
him
long time
sarcastically.
ago.
There was no
incomplete,
hatred in his eyes,
so it was a little crazy.
At this moment,
and
there was
abnormal.
more pity. As for
No
other
matter what
memories,
happened in the past,
most of them
at
were
least
chaotic.
now,
She
he and
hadn't
I are
fully
both
recovered her
pitiful
memory,
people.
so she
Creep.
couldn't see the
The
reason
bamboo
for a while.
door finally
What really annoyed her
opened with a
now
soft
was the
sound,
red mist that
as if
by
welcoming
Jean
a guest
spat
who had
to
not
Ling
been here for
Lee
a
just
long
now.
time.
The
Snakes
smell
were
of
extremely
sandalwood
lascivious.
wafted in the room. If Baijin's memory was correct, the red mist was a
After
strong
opening the
poison
door,
used by the
the
demon
scene
snake
inside
clan
was
to
reflected reflected in her eyes.
It couldn't be
Ling
removed
Li's body
by ordinary
shook
means.
violently.
The
in
only
an
way
instant,
was thinking
and
of
his
this.
eyes were
Su
full
Li
of
struggled.
disbelief.
She was about
It
to
was
die.
a memorial
If she
tablet.
really did it with
The two
Ling Li,
clear
what would
and
Ling Li
vermilion
do
words
after she left?
Su Li on it hurt
At this
his
moment,
eyes.
she
The
still didn't
suffocating
think about
pain
herself,
spread
but Ling
rapidly.
Li's feelings.
And then a
Perhaps
burst of
for Su
anger
Li,
mixed with
death was
confusion
coming.
broke
What
out
was the use of
instantly.
keeping a pure
I
body?
don't believe it.
Maybe
Even if you don't
I
believe
can.
it
All
won't
kinds of
change the
complicated
truth.
thoughts emerged.
It was
in
unknown
Su
when
Li's
Fong
mind.
Yuan came to
Then,
the bamboo house.
at a certain moment,
He lit a stick
when
of
a handsome
incense
boy
for the
lying in
memorial
front of her
tablet.
groaned like
He
a
looked
beast.
focused
The
and
girl,
affectionate.
who was pale
Li, I
all
gave him a
year
chance.
round. He really
Finally
didn't light the
blushed.
incense for you.
She gently
With such an
untied
idea
the
in
belt
mind,
around her waist.
Fong Yuan
and bent
seemed to
down.
be able to talk with
Roar.
Su Li.
At the
There was a
edge
trace
of
of
the
nostalgia
green snake
and
mountain
warmth
in the
between his
sea of
eyebrows.
white bones.
After inserting
Two
the
figures were
incense,
entangled with
Fong
each
Yuan
other. All
swept
sorts
away
of
the excess
indescribable
ash and
sounds
turned around.
echoed.
He was not surprised
After a
to see
long time,
Ling Li, who was
the
lost.
darkness passed.
Half a year ago,
and Ling Li
he was
opened
also
his
like
eyes
this.
blankly.
If he hadn't
Suddenly,
had an
he
unfinished
sat up
wish,
and touched his body.
he would have left with
He found that his
Su Li
clothes were
without
still
any
intact,
hesitation at the moment,
and the
when
wound
she
on his chest had
disappeared.
been carefully
Ling Li,
bandaged.
is
A
it a
voice
dream?
with a spiritual
Ling Li
shock of the
breathed a
longevity
sigh of
realm
relief
came into
and
Ling
immediately
Li's
blushed.
ears.
How
which
could he have such a
immediately
dream
made
with
Ling
Su
Li's
Li?
pupils
Was it because he was
condense a
too
little.
hungry? Sensing
After
that
thinking
Ling
for a
Li's
moment,
attention returned to
Ling
himself,
Li's sight
Fong
gradually
Yuan
returned.
smiled coldly.
Don't be
At
so
a glance,
useless.
he saw the
I'll
dark
let you
green
come to
corpse
worship Li,
as huge
not just
as
to
a
see you
mountain.
make a fool of
He was
yourself.
shocked and stood up.
Before Li left,
Then he remembered
she
the
left several
situation
wishes.
before he passed out.
Now I can't
Not a
fulfill
dream.
them,
So I can only
Li's heart
entrust some of
tightened.
them to you.
And he couldn't help
Hearing
but feel
this,
his whole
Ling
body
Li
carefully.
immediately sobered
As
up.
expected,
He stared at
he felt
Fong
a
Yuan
trace of
with
feeling
burning
in
eyes.
his lower body.
After a moment,
he and this
said
snake,
hoarsely,
thinking of
"Are
the
you
weight
willing?"
of his body
He could
in
see
a
that
coma
Fong Yuan
and the
was
constant
also
twisting
deeply in
touch.
love with Su Li.
Ling Li's face
If he put himself in
immediately
Su
became
Li's
ugly,
shoes, he was
as if he had
absolutely
eaten a
unwilling
fly.
to let anyone
Hierarch
touch the
Ling, what are you
things behind
thinking?
Su Li. There was a sudden
Hearing
voice
Ling
behind
Li's
him.
words,
The voice
Fong
was so
Yuan
close
suddenly
that it
smiled
sounded
like
in
a
his
winner.
ears. I love
Ling
her.
Li suddenly came
You are
to
not as
himself.
good as me.
He saw a young
Ling
man in
Li's blue
cyan
veins
clothes
bulged with an
What did you say?
inexplicable smile.
Do I have
on
to
his
say it
face.
again?
You
Mr.
are
Li,
really a bitch.
Ling Li whispered in
Ling Li.
surprise.
How
Before
could this
Fong
person
Yuan
appear?
finished his words,
And he
Ling
looked
Li
back at the
responded
snake
to him
monster
with
that
a
had been
big
dead
fist.
for a long time.
Ling Li's
There was a
eyes were
glimmer
full
of
coldness
hope
in his heart.
Obviously,
He asked a
he
little
was
eagerly,
extremely angry.
"Thank you, Mr.
Bang.
Li.
This
You
punch
saved me again.
fiercely hit
If I may
Fong
be so
Yuan's
bold,
side face.
may
and
I
Ling
ask
Li's
if I-
stunned eyes. Did you have sex with
Immediately,
the snake monster? Before he
The
responded,
young man in
Fong
cyan
Yuan's
clothes
fist
took over
also
the topic,
arrived.
but said
His
with
right
a faint
face was
smile,
also not spared.
Hierarch Ling should
Bang.
know best
Bang.
whether I
Bang.
did or not.
Bang.
Hearing
The
this
continuous
tacit
confrontation between the
acquiescence,
two men,
Ling Li was
very
completely
tacit.
silent.
Neither of them.
He was really
used
confused
Shin Chi
and didn't know what
They were
to
like
do.
street
So,
thugs. How could he go back
punching
to
and
Sealy?
kicking each other?
You should be lucky.
rolling on the ground.
If I didn't
of course.
sense the
Their faces were
abnormality
covered in
and
dirt.
come in time,
and they were in a
you would have
sorry
become
state.
one of these bones.
Chu Qingning heard the
Let's go up
news
first
and saw
Your
this scene
subordinates
as
should
soon
be
as he
waiting
arrived.
for a long time.
Suddenly,
His
Ling Li
mouth
was stunned
twitched slightly
and nodded to follow
Fong
the young
Mu,
man,
who
he
was
was curious
absent-minded
and
all
wanted
the
to go
way.
in to have a look.
So he didn't find that
Slipped
the young
away
man
without
in cyan
looking
clothes
back.
in front of him walked unnaturally. When they arrived at the entrance
Later,
of the stone path,
Luo Yichen,
Su Li had
who had become the
completely
son-in-law
suppressed
of the Mei
trace
family,
of
also
unnaturalness.
rushed here and left
Ling
the valley at the
Qingwan
same speed.
and others saw them
After
come out.
Su
They
Li
were surprised
disappeared,
that Mr.
Fong
Li
Yuan's
was also
temper
here.
became extremely
Then they saw the
strange.
blood on
He wanted to
Ling
go
Li's
back to
body.
accompany Mei
They were
Ruhan,
shocked, but he didn't want to be
surrounded him
unlucky.
immediately.
Both Ling Li and
Hierarch,
Fong Yuan
Master,
were in the longevity.
Ling Li,
how are you? They had
Ling
endless
Qingwan
strength in their
spoke
lives.
last.
Even
When
if
he
they
saw
didn't use
Su Li in
Qingong,
the iconic
they wouldn't
cyan
feel
clothes,
very tired.
He immediately
They didn't know
cupped
how
his hands
long they
respectfully and
They
said,
only knew that the
"Mr.
sky
Li,
changed from day to night.
why are you here?" After
Su Li
several
smiled
rounds,
slightly and
Ling
didn't
Li,
answer.
whose
Ling Li
original
came to his
face could
mind
not be
and
seen,
waved his hand
struggled
to
to
answer
pull
for
out
Su
his
Li.
clamped hands.
I was careless.
He kicked
this
on
time.
Fong Yuan's
I didn't
face,
expect that there was
and they
such a
immediately
horrible thing
separated.
hidden here.
Fong
If
Yuan
Mr. Li
wanted
didn't
to get
save
up
me
with a
in
straight
time,
face,
I am afraid.
but he couldn't mobilize
Ling
any muscle
Qingwan
in
was
his
suddenly
body.
horrified.
Finally,
Even Ling
he
Li
loosened his
said it was
breath
horrible
and lay on his back,
How powerful was
unable
the
to
thing
get up
below?
again.
Seeing
over.
this scene, it's useless
Ling
to
Li
say
showed
more.
an ugly smile
Su
on
Li
his
said
face
softly
and also
turned to
fell
look at
down.
Ling Li.
He gasped
She said
violently,
quietly,
but he didn't
I
forget
think
to
that
show
after
the
this
glory of being
experience,
the winner.
Hierarch Ling
You are
should
not as good as
understand
me.
taboos.
Fong
I have a
Yuan
suggestion,
closed eyes,
but I don't know
suddenly
whether I
opened,
should say it
and
or
was
not.
full of unwillingness.
Mr. Li, please
He also
say it.
gasped.
Ling
and
Li
said,
cupped his hand
if,
slightly.
If Su Li
The
didn't
owner of
give
the
you the
Ling Li
elixir,
building had
I
saved
would
him
never
several times.
What elixir?
And completely
Ling Li
eliminated
asked
his
subconsciously.
Suddenly, he was
Of
shocked.
course, the premise was
and
that
sat
he
up
didn't
directly.
covet Su Li.
Regardless of the
If
soreness of his
possible,
body,
the fewer
he
people
said in
know
a
about
hoarse
the thing
voice,
below the ground,
elixir,
the better.
The elixir
You know,
that can help
there's
me
more than
enter the
one
longevity
taboo
realm.
in the world.
Fong Yuan
And the
knew
number
that he spilled the beans,
maybe beyond the
so he didn't
imagination
say
of
anything
Hierarch.
immediately.
If they know that the
If he really
snake
told
is
her,
dead,
he would
they will
violate her
definitely
last
associate fish
it with
and let her
something.
down. At that
But
time,
Langley was also
there
a
would be a lot of
strategist
trouble
since he was a child.
When Sully said this,
and his mind was
Langley
like a
was
demon.
suddenly shocked.
All kinds of
He had really
unbearable
felt the
state of mind
strength
for
of the snake
were
demon.
just because of the
Even if he
influence of
sacrificed the
Sully.
lives of the people
Now,
of the
after a
Embark
round
cult,
of fighting,
he
his
couldn't
mind
compete
was
with
clear.
it.
If
Many
there was
things
another
came
one,
to his mind.
it would be a disaster.
And he suddenly thought of
Who could
all
guarantee
kinds of
that Misty could come in
possibilities
time
that he
next
hadn't
time?
thought of before.
Although he didn't know
You said that the
why
elixir
Mr.
was
Lee
given
could
to
save
me
him
by
every time.
Sully? He
but
couldn't
the elixir
entrust his
was given
life
to
to
me
a stranger
by
who had
Mr. Lee.
nothing to do with him.
Lingley didn't know
I
where
will
the
keep in
strength
mind
came
what
from.
Mr. Lee said.
He suddenly stood up
Suli
and
nodded
waved his
and
hand
said,
to blow
"Let
a
me give you
fine
another
gust
advice.
of wind,
The
which
Enma
removed
cult
all
is
the
not
mud and water
constrained
on his
now.
body.
I am afraid
Immediately,
that they will attack
he waved
the
his
Dong
hand,
Fong
and a
family
jade
soon.
bone mask
However,
appeared in his hand.
if hierarch
He glanced at Fong Yuan, who still
please listen to
closed
me
his eyes
and attack them
and
later.
said in a deep voice,
Lingley was
"This
shocked.
thing is a set
How
with
could
the
this
one
person
I gave to
know
Suli
everything in the past?
Even in the Enma
If
cult,
the other side
only a few
becomes
people
an
knew
ownerless
that
thing,
he would attack
as long as the
Dong Fong
range is
family.
not more than
He
100,000
even hid it from the
miles,
people of the
I will
Elder Mountain.
feel it.
Suli
But now,
noticed that
I don't
Ling
feel
Li's
anything.
expression
How do you
was
explain
different.
it?
She
Fong
couldn't help
Yuan
but smile
opened his eyes.
It is
and
not
stared
difficult
at the
to guess what
strange
Hierarch
jade-bone
Ling is
mask.
thinking. He was
That's
not
all I have
surprised
to
at all,
say.
and still
It
said
depends on
nothing.
Hierarch
Ling Li
Ling's
took a
opinion
deep
whether
breath
to accept
and
it
forced
or
himself
not.
to suppress
I have
the
something to do,
increasingly
so
uneasy
I will leave
conjecture
now.
in his mind.
Then
He
Ling
continued to
Qingyuan
ask,
and others
"Now
were
I just
about
want to
make
ask
a
one
fist
question.
and palm
How did Suli
salute
die?
to say goodbye.
Have you ever avenged
Suli
her
turned around
after such a long
and left
time?"
without stopping.
Avenged.
Ling Mo and others were confused.
Why did Mr.
Fong
Lee leave
Yuan
in a hurry?
subconsciously
Was it urgent?
tightened his
Ling Li
lips.
didn't care about
Although the
Su
change of his
Li's
expression
strange
was
departure.
not obvious.
At this moment,
it was keenly
he was in a
captured
mess
by Ling
and had
Li.
no time to be
You
distracted.
haven't avenged her yet.
After standing for
Ling
a moment,
Li's
he gently
eyes
breathed
gradually
out
became
and
cold.
sighed.
Who
Let's
is
go
the
back
enemy?
to the Ema cult
Fong
first.
Yuan felt that
Don't
he
go
had
back
recovered
directly.
a little strength.
Ling Qingyuan
He stood up
wondered,
and
"You have been out
slowly
for a
cleaned
long
the mud
time."
on his body.
Suli. It could be seen
As
that
soon
he
as he
was
heard Su
hesitating.
Li's name,
He was struggling in his
Ling
heart.
Li was slightly
and
shocked.
Didn't know what he was
He
worried
immediately
about.
looked at
Ling Li
his
was very
blood-stained body
patient
with
and
dinner
didn't
disgust.
disgust. He silently
I have to
stood
take a good
aside
bath first
and waited for Fong
Ling
Yuan to
Qingyuan
speak.
nodded.
But the
Although
pair
it
of
was
eyes
strange
like
that
lightning
she had to go
still
back
brought
to
a
the
lot of
headquarters
pressure
for something that could be
Fong
solved
Yuan.
on the road.
After a
He
long
didn't
time,
think much.
Fong Yuan
At
felt
present,
that there was no
everyone
mud
had
on his
fought
body
hard.
to be clean.
It was good to go to the
He suddenly
headquarters
came to his
to have a
sense
rest.
and looked up
Suli
to see
swept
Ling
to
Li
the
still
spiritual
staring
realm.
at him. His
Finally,
movement was
she
stiff.
couldn't stand it.
It
and
seemed that he
spat
finally
blood on
figured
the
it out
stone
and
pillar
turned to
of the
walk to
broken
the east
temple.
courtyard.
Such a movement
"Follow me,
suddenly
and you will know."
made the
Hearing
boundary
this,
ripple.
Ling
Then
Li
Shu
suddenly
Xiao
became
came through the
spirited
boundary with a shocked
followed him.
face.
As they passed
He
through the gate of the
supported Su
courtyard,
Li and said
Ling
in a
Li
panic,
suddenly saw
"Highly
a
great
lot
master,
of toys made of
what's
wood.
wrong with you?"
The surface was
Who were you
very
like
smooth.
this?
It was
Suli
obvious
shook
that
her
they had
head
been carefully
and suppressed the
polished.
sharp pain.
He
in
couldn't
her
help
heart.
but wonder if Fong Yuan wanted
She gritted
to
her
take him to
teeth
see
and
a
said,
child.
"Let's go in first."
But what did a child have to
Shu
do
Xiao
with
didn't
Su
dare
Li?
to delay.
Here we are.
He quickly took
When Ling Li
Su
was
Li
thinking,
into the spiritual
they walked to the
realm
door
and took her
and
all the
Fong
way to
Yuan
the top
subtly
and said,
"Don't
He
let
looked up
anyone disturb
subconsciously
me."
and suddenly
After Shu
saw
Xiao
a baby
left,
who looked less
the
than
room
1
was
year
quiet
old was
again.
playing with wooden
Suli had
toys
time to
accompanied by a
concentrate
wet
on running
nurse
the
in a
ghost
small
valley
space
meditation
surrounded
direction
by wooden
to suppress
fences.
the
This
boiling
child
thing in her body.
Ling Li was shocked
This thing
when he
was
saw the
nothing
baby.
else but the
A
blood
feeling
elixir
of
that
blood
flew out
connection
from Lin
surged from the
Yinxing's
bottom of his heart
eyebrows.
and
His son
entered her body.
How could it be his
For
son?
more than a year,
He and
this
Suli
thing had
obviously
never
didn't
moved,
wait, which
Ling Li
almost
suddenly
made
thought of
Su
something.
Li forget its
He stood in the
existence.
same place in a
But when she
daze,
lost her
and he was
chastity to
stunned.
Ling Li,
Fong
Yuan's
this thing suddenly
eyes were
began
slightly
to
dim.
crazily
As
impact
expected,
in her
as long
body.
as Ling Li
It seemed
saw
that this body
he could
was
recognize
no
it at
longer a
glance.
qualified
He
habitat.
loved Su Li as
If it was
much
in
as
normal
Ling Li,
days,
but his
she
luck
would let it go.
was much
But she
worse
clearly
than
felt
Ling
that this
Li's.
thing had
But
absorbed
at this moment,
all the remaining
baby sensed
foundation
something
in her body.
He turned his head.
If it left her
and saw
body,
two big men
she would
standing
definitely
at the door.
die.
He
So,
immediately smiled.
She could
and
only
showed
struggle
two
to
small
not
front
let it
teeth
break
that
the
had just grown
surface
out.
of her body.
Time became longer and longer in the suffering. She didn't know how long it had been. Her consciousness was blurred under the severe pain.
Mother?
Ling
Finally,
Li's trembling face
there was a familiar
suddenly
voice in her
stopped.
ear.
He looked
Master,
back
what's wrong with
instantly,
you?
but there was
Don't
no
scare me.
woman or even
It
a
was
person
Jing
behind
Xian's
him.
voice.
Who was the little guy?
It seemed that she was crying.
The wet nurse.
This girl
who was taking
should have
care
the
of him,
inheritance
changed her
left by
face
blood
slightly.
lord in her body.
She came over
No
and
wonder
saluted.
the old
She said in a
beggar's
voice,
panic sounded
"Protect
one
her,
after another.
please forgive me."
Followed by a ghostly
I've tried my
voice.
best to teach him.
Things have
but
come
he
to
is
this.
10 months old
Although
now,
the tactical matrix
and he can
has
only
not
call
been
mother.
fully prepared.
This
we can only
ordinary
bite the
babies
bullet
could
and
speak
do
a
it.
lot when they were
Ha.
at this age.
The day has
Some smart
finally
ones could
come.
even call father and
Apprentice,
mother.
although
when
the
they were 7
tactical tactical matrix of reincarnation. She had taken care of a lot of babies over the years. Not perfect, but the blood elixir in your body can also help you. Now, except for Mother, whether you can win a chance of survival depends on yourself. You can leave now. Fong Yuan waved his hand. For such a situation, he was already used 13. After the muddle-headed left, time lost. Fong Yuan stepped into the room at the beginning and picked up the child skillfully. Could only concentrate on resisting severe pain. He wanted to say something, but stopped on second thought. Finally, she had spare energy to touch the thought. He didn't know why he gave up the idea of asking. As soon as she touched it, seeing this, Fong Yuan's expression sounded in her heart unchanged. The tactical matrix of reincarnation and looked at the restless little fellow ghost clan. Although it is the most precious treasure to overflow with tenderness, it can be applied to anyone. He said, its only function is to turn the dead to life. The price is high, so we
It was
can't use this
self-evident
method at
Yan
ordinary
was.
times.
Li told me not to
This
tell you
time,
anything.
you capture people
Fang
from the
Yuan's
outside
tone
world.
was very light.
Although I don't know your
It seemed that he was afraid
I
to
gradually
disturb
have
the
an
little
idea.
guy.
If
But the
so many
unwillingness
life
in his
rings
words
are
was
broken
enough
together,
to shock
the
Langley.
vitality gathered
But I am not
is
reconciled.
enough to start the
Why?
matrix.
She was
The
born with a
process
hard
of
life.
changing fate
Not only did
must
she
be
not think
painful
for herself in
and
this
ordinary
life,
people can't
but she
bear it.
also did
But if you
so
persist,
much for you.
not only your
silently.
life will be safe,
But you didn't know anything
but also
about
your
it
talent
and accepted
and
it
luck will be
heartlessly.
greatly improved.
You even
And
resented
with this
her
matrix,
because of her
you will not be controlled
disappearance.
by the reincarnation.
Langley
mirror.
held his breath.
At that time,
He shook his head.
you can
and
break through the
murmured,
boundary
resented
and control
How could I
your
resent
own
her?
fate.
I just
Rebirth
He
from
just
the dead
missed her
and
so
changed
much
fate.
that he sped up the
Su Li's
destruction
soul
of the
set
Dongfang
off
family.
a violent
After
fluctuation.
abandoning the
Qi
heavy
Xian
burden,
Xing,
he did
and the
not
old
hesitate
beggar
to set
who
foot
maintained
on the
the
road
tactical
to
matrix
find Su Li.
outside.
But compared with what he
felt
had done for Su
they
Li
immediately
in these
looked up,
years,
but
these
Su Li
words
still
were too
closed
weak.
her eyes.
Fang
And there
Yuan
was no
snorted
sign
and
of waking
sneered.
up.
Don't think
Old
I don't know
ghost,
what you were
don't
thinking.
be too anxious.
Do you think it is so
It has
easy
only been
to
a
destroy
month,
the Dongfang
and this
family?
girl's soul
If
consciousness
Su Li didn't
has
make a move
responded.
in advance,
It shows that her
you would
will
have been
is
destroyed by the
firm
Shaoshan
and
Palace
tenacious,
behind the Dongfang
which is still
family.
above our expectations.
Shaoshan Palace?
Qi Xian Xing
Langley was
showed
frightened
a
and
gratified
couldn't help
smile.
raising his voice.
But in the eyes of the old
The
beggar,
Shaoshan
it
Palace
was a
and the
weird
spiritual
smile,
circle,
which made the
a year
old
ago,
beggar couldn't help
the
but
Shaoshan
murmur that he
Palace
deserved
was
to be
suddenly
an old
destroyed by a
ghost who had lived
mysterious
for many
force.
years.
All kinds of
Are
rumors
the little
were
kids
flying.
who follow
There were
Su
also
Li still
many
outside?
rumors in the Yinma
Qi
cult.
Xian Xing
At
suddenly
that time,
said,
he guessed that it was
and
probably
the
the
old
beggar
beggar
nodded
nodded
slightly.
slightly.
But now, according
the group
to
of
Fang
people under
Yuan,
Su Li are
it was
loyal,
actually the
which is
spiritual
quite rare.
realm.
Qi
Ling
Xian
Li's
Xing's
eyes
immediately
flickered.
sneered and said,
That's because they are lucky.
Yes,
I hate betrayal
only
most
the
of my
mysterious
life.
force
If
like
someone
the
dares
spiritual
to
realm
leave Su
could
Li,
destroy,
I will
the
personally
Shaoshan
kill him.
Palace.
Fang
The old
Yuan's
beggar
face
opened
was
his mouth in
colder.
surprise.
Who said it is
and
the
finally
spiritual
didn't
realm?
know what to say.
Ling Li, he could only
Today
shake
I
his
will let
head
you know
and
how
sigh.
much you owe
Madman.
Su Li.
You are a
Ling
complete
Li, I will
madman. Tell you,
I don't know whether it is
Ling
right
today
or wrong
I will let you today
to cooperate
Su,
with you.
Shaoshan
Qi Xian Xing
said,
smiled
otherwise,
grimly.
I just
want
won't be able to
future for
sleep
ghost
at night
kind for the rest of
and
my
you just
life.
want to escape.
Ling
both take what
slightly
we
Ling
need.
Ling Ling
What's
Ling
wrong?
Ling back. Ling
Even
was
so,
about Ling and
the
Ling
old
and
begger
Xi Xi.
looked worriedly
in
at Su Li,
and
who was still
and
suffering in the
Ling
tactical
Li's
matrix.
pupils shrank
No one had
slightly,
ever taken
but he
this road.
nodded without
Could Su Li
hesitation.
really succeed?
Brother Fong,
At the same
speak
time,
frankly,
outside
Fong
the tactical
Yuan was
matrix and
silent for a
spiritual
moment.
realm, and his
Fong
expression
Yuan
was slightly
and other
relaxed.
senior executives
He
of
said,
the Linley
Su
building
Li, you
gathered
are right.
here.
With
Everyone
that,
looked
he
gloomy,
glanced at the little fellow who
especially
was still
Fong
sucking
Yuan,
on his finger,
who was the leader.
Although I don't want to admit it, but he's your flesh and blood. Aren't you going to hug him and bring him back? Langley shook his head painfully and said bitterly, I am not qualified. I'll make plans after I hear what you have to say. Fong Yuan was stunned and said, all right. A moment later, in the quiet room of the valley's side courtyard, In Xuetong served tea to them and glanced at Ling Li, who looked haggard and lost in thought. She didn't say anything and turned away. The room was silent for a long time. Fong Yuan seemed to organize his words and finally said, There's one thing that you should know. Ling Xian, your maid, almost made Li die because of the fake news. Li's only aunt, Su Yu, also died because of this. One corpse and 2 lives. Ling Li gently covered his chest with his right hand and nodded silently. Fong Yuan's mentioning of the past was no less than tearing his scabbed wound again. Fong Yuan didn't sympathize with him and continued coldly. But you only complained that Su Li killed Ling Xian at that time, but you didn't care about Su Li. Her injury was also serious. The degree of seriousness was beyond your imagination. The elixirs you sent were useless. At that time, the doctor even asked us to prepare for her funeral. Ling Li's pupils suddenly shrank, and he said in surprise, How could it be? Later, do you want to say that Su Li was still fine after that? Fong Yuan narrowed his eyes and said, Hierarch Ling, think about it carefully. Don't let me look down on you. Ling Li slightly pursed his lips and whispered. Li was a little abnormal. It seemed that she didn't dare to use Xiangong easily. But I was busy with the affairs of the Yinma cult at that time. Later, Su Li returned to normal, so I didn't care about it. Now it seems, yes. Fong Yuan's eyes were burning. At that time, Su Li was like an hourglass. Hourglass? Ling Li's look changed. Fong Yuan immediately sneered and said, Yes, in order to live, in order to continue to fulfill your meaningless wishes, she embarked on a road of no return. She gambled everything in exchange for a short period of strength. In a few years,
She controlled Nanjiang country and Tianji country successively, which were all to create a peaceful environment for you. But you provoked the ancient existence, so she had to kill it at the cost of her own life. After coming back, her old injury relapsed, and she had to arrange the tactical matrix to tide over the difficulties. Although she survived, her life came to an end. But there was only a little time left. She still wanted to pave the way for you. After arranging the funeral affairs, she went to the Shaoshan Palace alone and died together with the old ancestor of the Shaoshan Palace. Lingli, now, do you know how much do you owe Su Li? If it weren't for her, how could it be so easy for you to unify the martial arts circle? If it weren't for her, you would still be at the peak of the inborn realm and couldn't completely control the Yinma cult. If it weren't for her, you would have been killed by the old ancestor of the Shaoshan Palace, and your Ling family would not exist in the world. At this point, Fang Yuan's eyes were full of coldness. He said, "But these years, what did your Ling family do? Although I can't wait for your Ling family to divorce Su Li and let me guard Su Li's tomb justifiably. But your mother secretly collected the portraits of those ladies in the past year. I don't believe that you don't know. But what are you doing? You only have your revenge in your eyes. Until Su Li died, you never really did anything for Su Li. You don't deserve Su Li at all." Boom! The anger erupted from Fang Yuan's body like a volcano. The momentum was like a cold blade hitting Ling Li. Ling Li's body protection immediately collapsed without any strength. Clang! The long sword was unsheathed and placed on the neck of Ling Li, who was in a trance. Fang Yuan's eyes were full of killing intent, although what he said was all speculation. But from the words of the old beggar and Qi Xianqing, he had already speculated about 80% or 90% of the truth. Even if there were some details that were missing, it was not surprising that they were not important. "You kill me." Ling Li suddenly calmed down. His turbulent mind recovered like a pool of stagnant water. At this moment, countless memories of getting along with Su Li in his mind were broken one after another. Finally, only the first time they met. In the bright lights, the two met. The girl cried bitterly. The boy was inexplicable and even vigilant. Since then, he had been in debt. Until now, he could no longer pay off the debt. It was better to pay with his life. Maybe he could see her again in the netherworld. "That's enough. Everyone stop." Suddenly, an old voice came. Then a black shadow flashed. The short old beggar had appeared. His two old fingers, which were like bark, clamped the blade of Fang Yuan's sword. Ding! The tip of the sword was broken. "Senior?" Fang Yuan's pupils shrank slightly. He immediately stopped. At the same time, there was a trace of fear in his heart. Just now, he was in a rage and lost his reason. If the old beggar didn't stop him, he might really kill him. Taking back the sword, Fang Yuan felt a little sorry. Not to mention Su Li's order. He couldn't let Nian lose his parents just for Su Li. The old beggar looked at Ling Li, who was absent-minded and didn't care about his arrival. He sighed, "Wake up. Maybe everything will turn for the better." Although the voice was calm, it was like a pervasive drizzle into Ling Li's awareness sea, which was almost closed. He suddenly woke up, and the light in his eyes condensed quickly. "Turn for the better," he said subconsciously, but found that his voice was extremely hoarse and unpleasant, like sand. This was the extreme grief caused by the state of mind. Even if he had a high cultivation, he couldn't avoid it. "Are you a fortune teller?" At this time, Ling Li recognized the old beggar. It was clearly the person who made a strange divination for him a few years ago. The old beggar smiled and looked at them. Both of them were one-in-a-million geniuses, and there were powerful figures behind them. Otherwise, they would never be arranged to be with the two mirror masters and even have all kinds of entanglements with them. However, even those powerful figures would never expect that these two people didn't plant seeds in Su Li's heart. Looking at the current situation, they clearly became Su Li's furnace and let her do whatever she wanted. Of course, all this was based on the basis that Su Li was still alive. "What is the turning for the better that you mentioned?" Fang Yuan frowned, and there was a trace of urgency in his words. "Is it possible that Li didn't I naturally don't know whether Miss Sue is alive or not. But at the last moment, when the Shaoshan Palace was destroyed, I sensed the breath of the mirror's spirit. Maybe, speaking of this, the old beggar stroked his beard and stopped talking. Ling Li and Fong Yuan's eyes immediately brightened. Since you come here, there must be a gap in your heart. If there is anything that we can help, please tell us. As long as we can save Li's life, we will die for it. Ling Li said loudly, and his eyes were full of determination. Chapter 321. I just thought of the method recently. The old beggar sat down and looked at Ling Li sideways. Do you remember the rune I drew for you in those years? Ling Li nodded, of course. When he drew the rune for him in those years, the old beggar talked like a child's play. But at this moment, the old man sitting in front of him inadvertently revealed his temperament, which proved that the rune was not drawn casually at that time. The old beggar smiled slightly when he heard this. Perhaps everything is destined by the heavens. A few years ago, I also drew a talisman for Miss Sue in addition to you. Now, that talisman has become the key to finding the opportunity. Then, the old beggar reached out his hand and touched Ling Li's wrist gently. Immediately, a large number of tadpole-like black runes emerged and covered the whole back of his hand in the blink of an eye. Ling Li's pupils shrank. The rune that the old beggar drew on his arm and wrist was spreading quietly these years, and he didn't notice it at all. Although there was a strange feeling of discomfort in his heart, Ling Li was anxious to know the way to save Sue Li at this moment, so he just ignored it. He cupped his hands and said, "Senior, please teach me." The old beggar didn't seem to expect that Ling Li would be so straightforward. He looked slightly surprised, and then smiled more. "Let me tell you in detail. As long as you break this world according to what I said, Miss Sue's soul can come back." A few hours later, the old beggar's figure suddenly disappeared, as ethereal as when he appeared. The door of the quiet room was opened. Ling Li and Fong Yuan walked out side by side and stood in front of the yard. The night had passed, and there was a touch of dawn in the sky, which was slightly dazzling. "Ling Li, do you believe what he said?" Fong Yuan suddenly spoke and broke the silence. He looked sideways, and his eyes were like a cold lake, flashing fiercely. Ling Li looked cold and breathed lightly, as if he was relieving the pressure. He said firmly in a deep voice, "You and I both know that no matter whether the old senior is selfish or not, as long as there is a glimmer of hope, I will not give up. This is the road I choose, and I will keep going until the end." Fong Yuan's eyes were shining, and he nodded gently after a moment. "Maybe it's a little late to say this. Suli may have expected that I would not hide it from you. So, she left you 3 requirements." Ling Li's eyes moved slightly. "What is it?" Fong Yuan looked at him enviously and finally said, "First, forget her." Ling Li looked cold and was about to speak. Fong Yuan shook his head and said, "Listen to me first." Ling Li could only suspend his thoughts and continue to listen. "As for her second request, if you meet someone you like in the future, marry them. Thirdly, take good care of Niena." Ling Li suddenly smiled, full of self-mockery. He said, "I can only promise the last one." As for the first 2, he clasped his hands behind his back and tilted his head to look at the dazzling morning light. His eyes darkened and became as deep as the night. "How is this possible?" Fong Yuan smiled slightly and didn't entangle too much on this issue. He had violated most of the instructions left by Su Li. If Ling Li didn't listen, he was not qualified to control it. If this could make Su Li come back, he would be willing to die. Niener is just a nickname. Consider it as a nickname given to him by me as his uncle. As his biological father, you should give him a proper name. That's called Buwang, Su Buwang. Does she want me to forget her? It's impossible in the next life. If you want to remember her in the next life, I won't have a chance. At that time, we can compete fairly. I don't believe that your luck will always be so good. Ha! Outside the wall of the yard, Chu Qingning craned his neck to look around. When he heard 2 magnetic laughter coming from the yard, he couldn't help but feel strange. These 2 people were stubborn. Yesterday, They were fighting with each other. How could they be like brothers after one night? He shook his head and turned to leave. Fang Yuan was in charge of the affairs of the Linli building. He was happy to be free. Yin Xuedong had been pregnant for more than 3 months. He had to go back to study the food for the girl. After a secret talk, Lingli left the yard without taking Su Buwang with him. Soon after, Fang Yuan, who had stayed in the yard for half a year, also set off for the spiritual circle. 3 days later, Fang Yuan, who was travel-worn, returned first with a tired face. He was not Su Li. It was very difficult to persuade Jing Xian, the great master of the spiritual realm. Anyway, after he said that the old beggar and Su Li were probably not dead, Jing Xian agreed, even if the action might make them doomed eternally. Another 2 days later, Ling Li reappeared. He didn't say much. After seeing Fang Yuan, he nodded. Fang Yuan didn't go deep into what method Ling Li used to let the Yinma cult execute the seemingly self-destructive order. He waved his hand for He, and his eyes darkened. "Let's go." Hazy looked dignified. He bowed deeply and turned away. Since the 2 men who stood at the peak of power gave the order, the secular world, the martial arts circle, and the spiritual circle were all turbulent. Countless martial artists and spies were sent out and integrated into the whole world to look for the remaining people with life rings openly and secretly. Fang Yuan gently pricked the Neguan point, and a pale red life ring immediately lit up on his wrist. Others could see it but couldn't touch it. Only he could really touch it and decide his own fate. As early as when Su Li left, she had already told him the meaning of this life ring. This world was fake. The life ring meant that he should have another identity outside this illusion. Dying in this world was not a real death, but if he broke the life ring by himself, everything would be over. A year ago, 8,000 people were deceived to break their life rings to sacrifice to the tactical matrix. That was to say, from that moment on, at least 8,000 people died in the outside world. The outside world had been in chaos as expected. But now, according to the old beggar's plan, they had to continue to collect life rings, and the number should not be less than 10,000. The turbulence could be imagined. Li's life ring is broken. Can she really be saved? Fang Yuan was deeply confused. He should believe in Li, but the old beggar gave him hope. So, even if he had many doubts in his heart, he still did not hesitate to carry out this extremely selfish and bloody plan. In less than 3 months, with the intervention of several dynasties and big forces, countless people who were detected to have life rings were sent to the secret boundary of the spiritual realm. All of these people were famous figures. They were either young geniuses whose names shook the world, or were extremely wealthy. Some were important figures of large clans, and some were not wealthy martial artists, but they were indeed good people with good reputations. With the inexplicable disappearance of these people, resentment and anger accumulated extremely fast. After the balance was broken, the entire illusion of reincarnation was in chaos in the blink of an eye. Flash floods, earthquakes, and natural disasters came one after another. In just a few months, there were countless deaths and injuries, and everyone was in danger. Some people were spreading the words of the end of the world, and people were in panic. At this moment, in the secret place of the spiritual realm, there was a dense crowd of people. It could be seen that all people's life rings had been broken, and the number was not 10,000 as the old beggar said, but 100,000. Each of them had a transparent silk thread connected to the complex big tactical matrix. The foundation flowing in the big tactical matrix was darker than the blood red of that year, like ink black. In the center of the big tactical matrix, Su Buwang crawled around. His eyes were pure and flawless, and he didn't know how evil he was. Good. The old beggar looked at such a spectacular scene, and his eyes were full of excitement. He shouted excitedly and looked at Ling Li and Fang Yuan, who looked gloomy. He praised without concealment. "I didn't expect that in just 2 months you can collect so many life rings, 100,000. This is close to the total number of all the regions. If this tactical matrix fails, it will be unacceptable." Let me start the big tactical matrix. As he said, the old beggar took a step forward, but was stopped by Ling Li. It's impossible for us to go back now. Senior, should you tell the truth? Is Nian in danger in the tactical matrix? This tactical matrix breaks the world. Can it really find Li? The old beggar suddenly looked sullen and seemed to be angry. Ignorant boy, how can I lie to you? Time is pressing. Get out of my way. The mirror spirit must have noticed the clues at this moment. If we don't start the big tactical matrix immediately, it will be too late. Ling Li's pupils shrank. What mirror spirit? He didn't understand. At this moment, Feng Yuan pulled him aside and said in a deep voice, "Let's see. We have no way back." Ling Li's face was slightly sullen. "What are you hiding from me?" Feng Yuan nodded silently and whispered, "After this, I will tell you everything. What the old beggar said is true. But what will happen after this world is broken, I don't know." While they were talking, the old beggar had come to Su Bu Wang and took a little blood from him. In the distressed eyes of Ling Li and Feng Yuan, he put it in the center of the tactical matrix. Instantly, the extremely horrible momentum rose from Su Bu Wang and turned into a spiritual pillar. 100,000 people with broken life rings instantly turned into blood mist. The blood mist surrounded the spiritual pillar and broke the bounded domain. The blood mist spread around and exposed the secret place of the spiritual realm on the plane of illusion. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The wind raged like a fierce tiger. Even with Feng Yuan and Ling Li's cultivation, they felt difficult to breathe and couldn't stand stably. Nian, Ling Li looked at the tactical matrix that had been completely wrapped by the spiritual pillar and couldn't be seen clearly. He shouted in surprise. Feng Yuan, whose cultivation was slightly lower, couldn't even speak. Just as Ling Li was about to rush to the center of the big tactical matrix, a white light suddenly flew out from it. His pupils shrank. He saw it was shot out and immediately stepped forward to catch it. Mother? The white light dissipated. Su Bu Wang tilted his head and looked at him with a pair of innocent big eyes. Ling Li was shocked. At this moment, the old beggar's voice came, "Leave quickly. Otherwise, after the mirror spirit appears, it will never let your son leave alive. Leave the rest to me." Ling Li looked serious. He glanced at Feng Yuan, who was still struggling to resist, and stretched out his hand to grab his shoulder. Just after they were thousands of miles away from the big tactical matrix, the sky suddenly dimmed. Dark clouds rolled, and a furious roar resounded through the world. Chapter 322. As the dark clouds rolled in the sky, a face quickly condensed into shape. "Is that the mirror spirit you mentioned?" Ling Li held his son tightly and looked at the horrible scene in the distance that the sky seemed to crack. He couldn't help feeling numb and cold inside. In addition to demons, how many monsters in the world were there that he didn't know? Feng Yuan gasped, and a trace of fear flashed in his eyes. And he seemed to think of something. He grabbed Ling Li and transmitted the sound quickly, "Run." Before the transmission was finished, Ling Li, who had sensed it, had already taken Feng Yuan to run away. Shortly after they left, the source of the tactical matrix suddenly cracked, and dark cracks appeared. Then it collapsed inward with a bang, forming a huge vortex that covered the sky and the sun. A strong suction was generated from it, and countless land and vegetation were swallowed by it. In the twinkling of an eye, tens of thousands of miles around Feng Yuan became a void. "Oh!" Ling Li gasped violently, and his forehead was full of cold sweat. He looked at the space that completely disappeared in front of him in horror, and the silent horror began to spread. Break the world. This world is really going to be broken. Did the old beggar do it? Then, Ling Li looked around and tried to find, "Where's Su Li?" Su Li. Before he finished his words, suddenly, boom, from the dark void, the loud sound almost broke the eardrum. Ling Li was so shocked that he quickly protected his son. But even so, Su Buwang's eyes were shocked with blood, and he burst into tears. "No, the new impact range is larger, and it's not safe here. Fang Yuan's face changed, and he rushed away. Ling Li could only temporarily put aside his thoughts and speed up to keep up. No one knew the result of the battle in the void later. Several months later, all the changes were just like the rumors circulating in the streets. In the azure sky, the pitch-black void gradually spread, and in the end, swallowed everything. Only a few dangerous places known as the continent's perilous lands were still struggling to hold on, and the number of survivors was less than 1,000. In addition, only a few sub-buildings of the spiritual realm were left, which accommodated many survivors. Soon after, the sound of the mirror breaking resounded through every inch of space in the illusion, and even people hiding in the dangerous places and the boundary could hear it clearly. What's going on? Is the boundary going to be broken? We are going to die. The world has really perished. At the same time that most people were crying out in despair, there was a small group of people who were staring fixedly at the sky, and their eyes seemed to be flickering with a bright light. If someone could decipher the meaning behind those eyes, they would definitely be able to see that the light was called anticipation. Fang Yuan and Ling Li were included in this small group of people. However, they didn't have any expectation in their eyes, but were gloomy and complicated. During this time, Ling Li had learned the truth from Fang Yuan. According to their situation at the moment, it was not difficult to guess that the old beggar was using them, and Fang Yuan acquiesced. After hearing that, he only kept silent and did not blame Fang Yuan. If Fang Yuan were him, he would do the same. He would not allow any hope to be blocked. After this world is broken, the memories of the soul's original body will return. Ling Li looked at his crying son in his arms, and his eyes flashed with tenderness and doting. He didn't understand until now how difficult it was for Su Li to give birth to a real child for him. But, if possible, she would rather exchange Su Bu Wang for a complete Su Li. Suddenly, a gust of wind came. Fang Yuan seemed to feel something and looked up. The pitch-dark nothingness was like a curtain at the moment, which was suddenly torn by a giant hand. The sky became azure again, but it was no longer the same sky as before. Soul of the Life Ring, return quickly. This world will be broken, and there will be no vitality. A voice like the morning bell, an evening drum, suddenly sounded in everyone's ears. Immediately, many people's eyes gradually became confused and finally became completely absent-minded. They turned into a flash of light and disappeared in the world. As for the creatures that were originally in the illusion, they disappeared the moment the void was broken. Ha 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 ha! I didn't expect that I would see the light of day again. Standing in the crowd, the inconspicuous middle-aged scholar suddenly laughed and shot to the broken nothingness. He disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. Those nothingness turbulence that could destroy everything did not cause any harm to him. Mother? Su Bu Wang looked curiously at Ling Li, who closed his eyes, and then tilted his head to look at Fang Yuan, whose face also changed as if falling into a nightmare. He struggled to come out and touch Fang Yuan's face, but Ling Li held him so tightly that he couldn't get rid of him. Rumble, there was a loud sound of the land collapsing in the nothingness. If Fang Yuan was still awake at the moment, he must be able to distinguish the direction, which was the several boundaries of the spiritual realm. But now, the two of them had no time to care about the safety of Chu Qingming and others. 2 hours later, a loud sound resounded by their ears. It turned out that a portion of this danger zone had caved in, and only 70% of its original size remained. Following that, a continuous sound of shattering resounded. If someone was awake at this moment, they would be able to see this danger zone shattering bit by bit. At a certain moment, as another flash of light left the center of the secluded place with a laugh, the speed of the dangerous place falling immediately accelerated several times. In the blink of an eye, there was only a space of 300 meters around Ling Li and Fang Yuan. At this moment, Fang Yuan's closed eyes suddenly opened. His eyes had changed a lot, and he couldn't find much familiarity with Fang Yuan anymore. He moved his eyes to the right and fell on Ling Li, who was still recovering his memory. A deep hatred immediately appeared in his eyes. This kind of hatred was no longer as soft and hesitant as before, but unforgettable, as if it would not stop until one of them died. Now was the best time to take action. Feng Yuan's fingers touched the hilt of the sword, and his center of gravity shifted down. When he was about to draw the sword, he suddenly heard a voice of doubt. "Mother," a childish voice suddenly sounded. Feng Yuan's movements suddenly stopped, and his eyes fell on Su Buwang. His eyes immediately showed the meaning of struggle, but the killing intent in his heart had faded. He had tried his best to ignore the existence of this little guy, but unfortunately, man proposes, God disposes. Since he heard the word mother, he knew that at least now, he couldn't kill Ling Li. Then, after a few seconds, Ling Li took a deep breath, and his eyelashes trembled. Finally, he opened his eyes, and his temperament changed dramatically in an instant. He was less righteous than before, and more evil and gloomy. Feng Yuan was immediately on guard. If the original Ling Li was just a pool of clear water, then now, the young man standing in front of him, holding Su Buwang, had become like a deep sea, unpredictable. The first moment Ling Li opened his eyes, he fell on Su Buwang, who was still struggling in his arms. His evil eyes immediately converged and turned into a little softness. After gently teasing Su Buwang's little face a few times, he stopped and suddenly raised his head. Feng Yuan's breath instantly stopped. Although he was expressionless, it was not difficult to see that he was nervous. Ling Li raised his evil eyebrows, like a sharp sword piercing the clouds, which made Feng Yuan's face turn pale. He couldn't help but step back to the edge of the danger zone. If he took another step, he would fall into the nothingness and be doomed eternally. But even so, Feng Yuan sadly found that the pressure of the nothingness behind him was not as great as that of Ling Li in front of him. Sure enough, he deserved his reputation. "It should be the first time for me to see you." Ling Li slightly raised the corners of his mouth, and he was extremely calm, as if the anxiety and madness brought by Su Li had left him. He said lightly, "But you want to kill me. It was a good opportunity just now, but you didn't do it. Is it because of the woman who courted her own death? Or, speaking of this," Ling Li just glanced at Su Buwang in his arms, and his indifferent tone was full of sarcasm. "You are really a sentimental person." Feng Yuan's face changed slightly. His right hand trembled violently, and the long sword buzzed. How could he say that about Su Li? He changed. How could he be so fast? Even if he shouldn't forget all the influences in this world in just a few seconds. If he had known this, he should kill him. But he also knew that even if he did it now, he had no chance. The opportunity left for him just now had already disappeared. Ling Li calmly looked at Feng Yuan's changing expression. Seeing that Feng Yuan always restrained himself and didn't dare to act rashly, a trace of boredom appeared on Ling Li's face. "Oh, you still don't dare? There are countless people in this cultivation circle who want to kill me. You don't matter. Today, for the sake that you didn't do it, I will spare your life." While speaking, Ling Li disappeared with Su Buwang like smoke, and the last sentence slowly sounded in the nothingness. "Next time, don't even have the courage to do it. Ha ha ha." Ling Li looked at the direction of the voice, and his lips almost bled from biting. "Ling Li, if I become an immortal, you will die." Rumble. As soon as he said this, the last foothold also shattered into powder, and Feng Yuan was immediately thrown into the nothingness. Just when this pair of big hands finally broke through the black curtain and fished out Feng Yuan, the illusion of reincarnation finally completely returned to nothingness and became history. In the rapid movement of the giant hands, Feng Yuan could hardly open his eyes because of the fierce wind, but he still tried his best to open his eyes and see where the giant hands were going to take him. With a glimpse, Feng Yuan suddenly froze because he finally saw the whole picture of the reincarnation mirror. It was really just an ordinary mirror that was only the size of a palm. Although the patterns on it were simple and unadorned, they weren't rare. After so many years of twists and turns, it was actually in this mirror. how vast the world was and how small it was. Bang, 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 bang. Just when Feng Yuan was shocked, suddenly a series of cracking sounds sounded, just like what he heard in the illusion before. Feng Yuan fixed his eyes and then saw. The spiritual circle, which was called the ancient treasure, cracked like a spider web. Then with a bang, it was completely broken into many pieces and scattered into the endless nothingness. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.